So welcome to the Race Brothers podcast, special family edition. Today we are really excited to have my father and uncles and great aunt, and we're going to be entering and exploring some of the Race family history, and hopefully also just some other perspectives on life and on living, up in America, living in America, and what it means to live in today's world. So we're going to first go around just to introduce everybody. So please, Aunt Perrie, please introduce yourself.
I am your aunt, not your cousin. Is that right? No, I'm Yossi's cousin.
Right, you're really a cousin. I'm just giving you the term aunt because I figured
I'm Tante Perrie. Okay, I'm Tante Perrie. I'm everybody's booby. And when my mother became a booby, when I made my mother into a grandmother, so she became booby. So her mother, who up until then had been booby, she became boobishi. So boobishi became the title for great-grandmother. So at one point, I became booby, and then, no, I became mommy, and my mother became booby, and my grandmother became boobishi. But I'm not prepared to talk about living in America. I want to tell stories about our grandparents. I have a certain perspective of stories that I've heard. I don't know whether they're all true, whether they're whatever they are, but that's what I prepared as my contribution to this evening. So I'm not prepared to talk about life in America and coronavirus and all that kind of stuff. I'm not really interested in that. What I thought that I wanted to prepare was stories that I got from Europe, that my grandparents told me of stories of their courtship and their life in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. But let's go on to the next intro. Go ahead, little brother. I must tell you, when my brother turned 40, he became my older brother. Because there's no way I could have been an older sister to a 40-year-old man. Go ahead, Heshy, your turn.
My turn for what?
Introduce yourself.
My name is Heshy Nagel, and I am Perrie's older brother, as you just said. And I am first cousins to Yossi, Moshe, and the others. And
hey, where does Pinky?
Exactly, my relationship is my mother and Yossi and Moshe's father were sister and brother.
Well, I'm in the same category. Where is Pinky in all this? Is he involved in this at all?
Should I try and reach him?
I'm sorry?
By all means, he should jump on. We kind of pulled this together last minute, so by all means.
Okay. I think someone's at my door.
Okay, thank you, Heshy. I'm Yossi Raice, the cousin that Perrie talked about, being my father and her mother, and Heshy's mother, which is the same person, were brother and sister. And I'm here to find out all I can find out about what went on with my grandparents before I knew them. It's up. There it is, Moshe. It's you now.
Yeah, Moshe Raice here. I'm Yossi's younger brother. That's my call to fame.
Your claim to fame.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to make this all clear, is that we all share the same ancestors, which was Chaim Yeshua and Chaya Raizel. Right? And that's really where we're going to go back to, right? So Chaim Yeshua and Chaya Raizel, for all of you, is your grandparents.
Correct.
Yes.
So that's where we're going to go from.
We share grandparents.
I'm going to mute Uncle Moshe. Okay. So
okay, Perrie, let's start off with some of what you want to talk about, what happened in Europe.
Okay.
Who did it happen to?
We're talking about Bubby and Zaidi.
Yes.
We're talking about Chaim Yehoshua and Chaya Raizel, who were born, I think I was told they were cousins. If there's any discrepancy here and you have different stories, feel free to interrupt.
They were definitely cousins. I can tell you how they were cousins too.
Tell me how they were cousins.
Okay. Perle, okay. Perle of the famous picture, the one who you're named after, yes. Perrie?
The one that you named after, yeah, that you made copies of for everybody.
Yes.
Perle is who?
She was
Chaya Raizel's mother.
Chaya Raizel's mother.
Chaya Raizel's mother was a sister to Chaim Yeshua's father, Tzvi.
Oh, so that's why Heshy and I are sitting together in that picture. Heshy is Tzvi and I'm
Eliezer.
Well, Heshy's actually both. Heshy's Tzvi Eliezer. He's named after both of your mother's grandfathers.
Okay.
Tzvi and Eliezer.
And I'm Peril.
And
So
you're
they really were first cousins.
They were first cousins.
That's why we
exactly.
turned out the way we did.
That's right.
Not very-
Exactly right.
That should be a recipe for everybody should do that. And they were born in Zaklikow, correct?
Zaklikow. Well, I don't know if they were born in Zaklikow.
But they lived in.
Huh?
They lived in Zaklikow.
They lived in Zaklikow. They probably were born there. I doubt they went to hospitals to give birth in those days.
More than likely not.
Yeah.
Okay. And the way I got it is they were in love since they were children. Do we got that? Did you get that stuff?
The way I got it was Zaidi, Chaim Yeshua, was in love with Chaya Raizel, but he couldn't say anything. So there's the famous story that Fegi loves to tell over, is that one day he kind of, whispered to her. I guess maybe they had a family meal or some occasion where they saw each other, which was not common, I guess. But he whispered to her, "Ein Fegel mach nicht kein Zimmer."
That's a good story.
One bird doesn't make a summer, meaning that we have to be two of us.
Yeah,
So,
and she answered.
And she liked it. I don't know what her answer was, but she probably demurely just smiled. I'm guessing. I don't know. and that was it. And after that, they they made it happen. He made it happen.
There is a story that I got somewhere, and this is going to make it a little PG rated. There was a time that they were both seen coming out of the forest together. Do you have anything in your stories that have anything to that effect?
That has been censored from me. I never got that.
Okay. But there was a story that Chaim Yoshua was a catch because he was learning in some yeshiva out of town.
Lublini yeshiva.
No,
okay, and he was quite
not
a catch.
learning Lublini yeshiva.
Not? No?
He came to America before that yeshiva was founded. He was
So
learning.
it wasn't. He was learning in some.
He was learning by Reb Meir Shapiro. Reb Meir Shapiro was a young Melamed Tinoikas, young Melamed of boys, and he hadn't even dreamed that. I don't know if he dreamed, but he hadn't started the yeshiva Chachmei Lublin yet. That came years and years later. But he was known as it was a shtickle gadol even at a young age, before he made the Daf Yomi and before he had Chachmei Lublin. And Bubi was very proud of the fact that Zaidi had learned by she called him Ramayel Shapiro.
Okay, Meirel. Okay.
And also another thing about Zaidi is that he was a Heisbucher by the Imrei Emes. I don't know if you people appreciate what a Heisbucher is. That's a houseboy. That's an assistant to the Rebbe in his house, helping the Rebbe in his house. There was a very select few that got that privilege, and it was considered a huge honor. And Zaidi had that privilege for some period of time, as a boy, as a teenager probably. So he was a catch.
He was a catch, and all the families used to come and ask him, tell them that they had a daughter, and how much Naden did he want to marry their daughter. And he would ask for an extravagant amount of money that he knew they could not afford, and they would bring him the next daughter, the next family, and he kept asking for these huge amounts of Naden, and nobody was coming up with the cash. And then they finally came to Chaya Raizel and they said, "How much do you want for that?" And he said, "Gornished." And he didn't want any Naden at all from her, and that's how the match got made. You got any story to that effect?
I love that story.
Not to be
I never
done.
heard that. I love it.
Is that a good story? And I'm not making up these stories. Okay.
Who told you
that story?
Who told you
Who
this?
I remember,
Bubby?
it's part of the family lore.
Okay, but you don't recall who told you.
No.
Okay, it's all right.
But he did have a job at one point, something with logs down the river.
That was his father. That was his father.
His father.
The logs down the river was Laser, right? Laser, his father-in-law, was the one who did the logs.
And Zaidi himself did not have that job?
No, Zaidi never had that job. Zaidi came to America as a young
But before Zaidi went to America, my mother has a story that she used to go to him to bring him his lunch.
No, she used to go to Laser to bring him his lunch. She told me the story too. It was Laser. When she was living by that was after her father was already in America. When after Zaidi left, when your mother was a little girl, I mean a baby, basically.
My mother was a baby.
A baby.
She was like 3 years
5 years old.
No, when they left,
No,
she
she-
probably was like 2.
Oh, yeah, she
Year
was
and a half.
2, 3. But I'm
Yeah.
talking about, because I asked my mother her first memory. And she told me that story that when she was a little girl, her mother said, Gay, bring a sandwich. How do you say it in Polish? To the Zayda, who was by the river counting logs. And
Epicessum.
then while she was there, the Zayda Laser said, Gay, bring me a bissel Wasser. Ich will waschen Hände für mich.
Right. That's
That's
right.
right.
That's
That was
an
the first
accurate
time.
story. But that
So who does
story,
that pertain? That pertains to her father or to Zaidi?
No, this is
No,
Zayda
no.
Laser.
her grandfather, let's get this straight. When our Zaidi, Chaim Yeshua, came to America and left his wife and his daughter, your mother, they moved in. They didn't stay in where they had been living before. They moved in with her parents, with Laser and Perel.
Right.
And that the next 6 years or so, she lived with her grandmother, and her mother in that house. And her mother sent her when she got a little bit older, because they moved in there when she was maybe a year and a half, 2 years. So when she was a little older, her mother sent her down to the river. Her father, remembers, away in America in Baltimore. And she was sent down to the river to bring her Zaidi, her mother's father, who they lived with, a sandwich. And he sent her to get him some water so he could wash his hands.
Okay, so this is a story that I thought belonged to her father, belonged to Zaidi Shia, turns out to have been to her father. But unbeknownst to Zaidi Shia, when he left to America, unbeknownst to him, Chaya Raizel was pregnant. Did you know that?
No.
Yes, Chaya Raizel was pregnant.
She had a miscarriage or something.
She did not have a miscarriage. She had a little boy who lived till he was 2 years old, and he died of an iron horror. Baleres gewesen azoi shein and azoi klieg and azoi weil is gestorben von an iron horror. When he was 2 years old, this baby died of an iron horror.
What was his name?
I never got that name. I have no idea of his name. But obviously that name was not a name that was carried on.
Well,
Nobody. But on the other hand, Alta B'Tzion Sender had a whole bunch of names because he was named after a lot of people who died before he was born. What's the story with why does your father have so many names?
Not so many.
Well, his name was B'Tzion Sender. His name was initially B'Tzion Sender. The Alta was added. And there's a machlaikis and gisois of what caused the addition. The way I heard the story was, and I may be mixing it up with Feige's version, so I'm going to tell you what I think is my version. I'm not even sure anymore. Is that when he was an infant, he became very sick. He was in the hospital, and Bubi was there with him, and she wouldn't go home until finally she was exhausted, and he was running a high fever, and I don't know what the illness was, and then finally they insisted that she go home for a couple of hours to take a nap, and somebody else came to take over. This was in the hospital in Brooklyn, and she had a dream when she was asleep, and in her dream she was walking in the street, and she came to a corner where there were four older women standing there. And as she walked by them, they said, Raizel. And she said, Vus? And they said, Sizgit. And she woke up and she ran to the hospital, and they said, the fever broke like 20 minutes ago. By the time she got to the hospital, it was 20 minutes. So she believes that those were the Imahis, and they can tell her that the baby's going to be okay, Sizgit. And talking when she got to the hospital, the fever had broken, and that was it. But anyway, on that occasion,
they named him Alta.
So before this fever broke, while he was sick, I think I heard that they sent a telegram to the Zayda, the Zayda Laser, because he was an email. They sent him, yeah, and they asked him what they told him about the baby sick. So he said Lake Tsianuman. And I think he may have said which name to Leitzi. I don't know if he did.
Who said this? Who is this?
Laser, Heshy's namesake. Laser.
But he was back in
her
Europe.
Mother. He was in Europe. They didn't do email, Perry. They did a telegram, actually.
Oh, I didn't think they sent telegrams to Zaklikow. Okay.
They'll send them any place that they're willing to pay for them to go to.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's the story of how my father got the name Alter added.
But
Thinking has
nobody
some
ever heard
variation of that, a little bit different, but it's the same basic idea.
Okay, what's the other variation?
He might have been a little older than an infant. I don't know, maybe 2 or something like that. I don't know what the real.
I also had a story that your mother, that Chaya Raizel had several miscarriages before Alter was born, which is the reason that he had a couple of names. But nobody else knows the
You
story.
don't usually add a name until they're born. I mean, you can't, you know.
I
No,
have
but-
an entirely
Oh,
different
you
story.
mean that there were people? Oh, I can tell you who the siblings were. I have Rivka, that's Chaim Yeshua's mother. She had, as far as I know, 4 siblings. One was Shendel, who we knew. Remember the Tante Shendel?
Shandel was
I
here.
remember
yeah.
Tante Shendel.
Tante Shendel,
remember.
that was one. Then there were 3 that. Then there were 2 that we never knew. One was Yosefusha, who I'm named after. One was Avraham, who was one of the thoughts I had from.
I was named after.
Who's named Avraham?
Rivka, Rivka, Chaim Yeshua's mother's brother.
But Chaim Yeshua's, whoever it is Rivka. So who's my mother named after Rivka?
Maybe she's named
I'm
after
not
that
sure.
Baba. Probably
A
after that
different
Baba.
A different Rivka. Oh, but that Baba was
Oh,
dead
maybe.
already when
I'm sure.
she was born.
That's very, very likely.
Okay.
Very
Why
likely.
is that very likely? She must have been pretty
Young.
Yeah, she must have been very young to die that young. We're talking about Chaim Yeshua's mother, and they got married young
when they
in
were
Europe.
very, Chaya Raizel and Chaya Shia got married very young.
Right.
So if
How young?
and
How
whose
young
mother
were
is this? Is this Shia's mother or is this Chaya Raizel's mother?
No, it's Chaim Yeshua's mother.
Yeshua's
Chaya Raizel's mother was Peril.
Right.
So Chaim
Oh, yes.
Yeshua's mother, I mean, unless maybe he lost his mother so young, that's why he was able to pull a stunt by saying he wanted a big nada.
Who knows? Anything's possible.
Because if his
Well, he
mother was
wanted-
around, she would have smacked him up.
But when he said,
Then
I
there
want
was
that,
one more, and there was one more sibling named Raiza. Remember that name?
no.
I remember hearing that name all my, but Raiza was another one. And then you have
Raizel
Chaim-
and Raizel? That doesn't
Raice
sound.
and Raizel has to be the same.
not Raizel, Raiza.
Raizel
Raizel.
is like Raizel.
No, well, it's Rose.
That's what Raizel is.
Her name
So
is
you
Rose
could-
Race.
That's true.
Yeah, but you could have a Rose because this Rose you're talking about is Chaim Yeshua's what, sister?
Uncle, aunt.
But it's on his side of the family, not on
Right.
Chaya Raizel's
Right,
side.
right, that's right. That's
It's
right.
interesting.
So that's
that,
how she could be a Chaya Raizel.
Right, right.
it's interesting that the name Raize, which is also like a Raize, which was a common Yiddish name, Raize, is actually the daughter of the Rubshitzer, which was one of the reasons because we were trying to figure out where we got the name Raize, which is race.
Right,
Like, where did that come from?
right.
So one of our little, ideas is maybe because supposedly we have a Rupshitzer blood,
Connection.
and could be the Rupshitzer blood connection was from the Rupshitzer's daughter Raiza, which would make sense why that name would have also been passed down and why we might have taken that as a last name.
Okay.
Possible.
Do
I'm
we
open
have
to.
any?
I'm curious if there's any ideas of why we took that name though. And there were a
Because
lot
when
of
you-
Raices that were in Zaklikow that died in Zaklikow during the war.
Yeah, we looked it up. There were a lot of races, right? Right. So
Yeah.
that's
Really?
Yeah, Avrams, Rafals, Moshe Tzvi's.
Yosef Asher Raice who lived in Haifa. And we had a picture.
We had a picture from. Bobby came back from Bobby Raizel came back from her trip to Israel with a picture of some family in Israel. I'm not sure who they are.
Yosef Asher and all the names of the family. They lived, I believe, in Haifa.
Yeah, I remember that. You're right. You're
And
right.
we had we probably had that picture around something,
have
but
it.
we never followed up on it.
Not letting
You
us
follow
see
up
it.
on
We
it.
have
I
a
don't
lot
know.
of cousins.
Yeah. True.
Wow.
Do
All
we
right,
have
I
any
have two
story?
stories. I have 2 stories over here about the ultimate sin sender was how he got his name Alto was a different story, and who was sick was your mother, Perrie, your mother, Bubishi, Tante Betty was one who was sick with appendicitis. She had appendicitis, and she was in the
Yes.
hospital.
That's why they
Right.
named him Ultimate Sin Sender.
No, that's a different story. and with the 4 women, that was to Bubishi, to Chaya Raizel. They came to her and they were talking about
Rivka. About Rivka.
Yeah.
Maybe they came twice.
That's right. Well, they knew the way already. They already had the address. But I remember that story about she had appendicitis and the appendix burst.
Right.
And
those
she
days
had a
that was
very
pretty
high,
fatal. So
and she had a very high fever, and there were no antibiotics, so there was nothing very much to do for it.
Did they do surgery?
No.
How old was she then? She was
Really?
a child?
Young.
She survived appendicitis bursting without surgery?
She was a
She had
child?
she was a child. She was in America. How long? I want to go back to Europe for a minute. Let's go before. I have
This
a
was in
story
Europe.
that Bubi told, that Chaya Raizel told, about how she survived the few years after Zaidi left to go to America. How did they survive financially with no income, even though she was living by her parents? So I remember her telling me.
Didn't she become a smuggler?
She smuggled. Yes.
Yeah, smuggler. She was a smuggler.
Did she tell you what she smuggled and how she smuggled?
Tobacco?
She had
The lining of her coat.
She had a skirt that she made different layers in the skirt so that they could accommodate different things. And in one layer she made barley, and in one layer she made beblech, and one layer she made split peas and whatever. And she went to the goyim there, and she sold these vegetables or grains or whatever it was, and that was how she zat geschmuggelt.
She crossed the border, right?
Stuff? She didn't buy it and resell it. She stole it.
She grew it. No, maybe they grew it.
Grew it, and then
Maybe
she sold it like it was on a black market or something.
No, she just sold it. That's they grew it on the fields there.
What was the smuggling? Smuggling means you go from one
where to
area
where?
that has different taxes or something.
Well, they didn't have a store. They didn't have a store. They just had. Maybe she called it smuggling. She wasn't. I mean, maybe she went to an area where there wasn't supposed to be sold. Gee,
Otherwise, why would she be
What I
hiding?
heard,
Why
Why
would
would
she
you
what I
hide
heard
it?
was that
Because she was selling stuff that she didn't have a store for, and she was probably not paying taxes. So,
Maybe.
but she was selling stuff
Yeah.
that she had packed into her skirt. That's the
I
story.
also heard that she used to have a wagon, or rent a wagon, or had a wagon that had a false bottom, and she would maybe Heshy told me this, and she would ride to the border, which she wanted to cross the border with some smuggled stuff. I also heard it was tobacco, but I'm not sure.
Wait a second, a border with what country? A border with another
between
country?
Russia and
Maybe-
Germany.
Yeah.
In Russia and Poland.
Every time that there was any battles, Zaklikow, Zavachos. Now I know Zavachos, which is a little bit to the east of Zaklikow. That's because that's where our Fogel family comes from, and both of these little towns were constantly switching borders from Poland to Russia, depending on every time that there was there were wars. They constantly were moving this. So from what I understand, I also remember Tante Betty telling me about this and how she would cross the border back and forth, and that was the smuggling that she was doing.
So
they were right there.
Without moving out of the house, they went from one country to another.
No. I'm not saying that. Could be at that time they were on one side of the border, but I'm saying that right where they were living, there's this river over there, the Vistula River. It was
Vistula.
The Vistula, whatever. So
Well-known Polish river.
I'm saying that we know that the border between the different countries was running right there. So whether maybe their whole life it didn't change, but they were right by the border. This was they were a border town.
Okay.
And it makes sense also because I know that my father likes to claim that the Kol Makadish that we learned from my mother's side, that he says we kind of knew it from his side also, would make sense because Zaklikow and Zavachos are very close together.
And they could hear the singing from one to the other.
Well, I'm saying it would make sense that they were singing the similar Nagunim. I'm curious though, what the family? What were they? They were Ger Hasidim. That they were.
Sure, of course they were Ger Hasidim.
I'm saying Kotsk, Lublin. There was also other towns around there.
We know. My father told me there were Gerach Chassidim. Not only that, but Zaidi was a Heisbucha by the Imre Emes, the Gerer Rebbe.
Really?
Okay. And I have a grandson-in-law who's from Kutsk. Well, he claims he was. This is Fran Laufer. Shimon Laufer was a Kutzka. Okay, anyway. Okay, any more stories?
It's all the same area. All like the Hasidim over here, all like these Polish Hasidim. This is what they were into.
Any more stories about the European part of it? Anybody have any more Europe stories?
Yes, I have another one.
Okay.
This is from your mother, who told it to me herself. When she was probably around 5 or 6, I think she said 6, she was helping her mother in the kitchen, and she was koshering meat or chicken. I'm not sure if it was meat or chicken. Salting either chicken or meat. And like the Zayda was sitting in the other room, the Zayda Leza, and he noticed that she's working over there with the meat or the chicken, and he called her over. He said, Raizel, kimaheya. When she came over, he said, Raizel, a wiffel Seiten salzt man Fleisch? On how many sides do you salt meat? And
you don't have to translate. You don't have to translate.
Okay.
Well, for the benefit of all the people that will listen to this.
That's also true.
The next generation.
For the hordes, the hordes. She said, of sechs Seiten, he says, Ken salzen.
He's willing to eat her. He's willing to eat the meat that she kosher.
He's willing to eat her hechsh.
She had her own hashgacha.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a beautiful story.
That's a nice story.
I love it.
Now, when did
it says
Zaidi
things about him and about her?
Now, the reason Zaidi left to America is because otherwise he was going to be drafted into the Tsar's army. Correct?
Okay, I never heard that, but it makes a lot of sense.
Because once he got drafted into the Tsar's army, that was 25 years, and that was a whole lifetime. So he ran away. Oh, but there's...
No. First, he cut his trigger finger.
Okay, right.
He cut his trigger finger, and he thought that exempted him from the army. So that worked for a while, and then that wasn't enough. So then he poked out an ear. Do you remember which year that was? Because whenever we learned together, he would say, "Zitz of Desert." Which year was it? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I really don't remember. But I think it was by putting an acid into his ear. I think he poked it out. I think he poured something in. That
somehow or other he broke his eardrum, so he was deaf on one ear, and that should have been enough to disqualify him from the army. But nevertheless, he still felt that he was going to be drafted.
After those two things were not enough of an exemption, then he says, I'm out of here. I'm going to.
Right.
And I thought it was not because of the 25 years. I thought you couldn't keep kosher, you couldn't keep Shabbos.
Yeah, the 25 years, what really, I think, was what the cantonisten, they used to take the kids when they would have children, but he was a little older than that. He was already married. So I don't think he could have become a cantonist.
But it was very bad for your health because they were fighting with Japan. There was a war going on with Japan.
That's so Japanese. Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so he left. It was the beginning of the First World War, right?
Yeah. Shortly before the First World War broke out.
Which is 1914.
Yeah, so it might have been 1913 or so when he left.
Okay, let's go approximate. Okay, now they had, to the best of my knowledge, what I was told is they had no contact at all during the entire course of the war. They didn't send emails and they didn't send telegrams. There was no contact until after the war was over, which is 1919. So my little bit of math there is 5 solid years of this young couple, 21, 22 years old, when they left each other, and there was no contact for the next 5 years. This is shocking.
Not just a young couple, a little baby, his little daughter.
A little baby Rivkala, exactly. And how they survived those 5 years must have been very difficult. But, okay. Any stories about Zaidi living in America before Bubby came?
And something from your mother told me. I asked your mother once, what was her earliest recollection as a child? What does she remember? The earliest recollection. She says, I remember going to my mother and asking her for food. My mother said, no, we don't have any food. Go next door to the neighbor. Maybe the neighbor will give you something.
Wow.
I remember a story when they were coming to America, and Bubby, Chaya Raizel, and my mother were looking at the boat, looking over up to the side. There's a whole bunch of men waiting there for their spouses and children to come. And my mother said to my grandmother, "Is this my tatashi? Is this my father?
Welche man tate? Welche man tate?
Is my
Yes, is this my tatashi?" And she said, "No, that's not." And then she said, "Point this one, this is my tatashi." And then Bubby said, Chaya Raizel said, "This is damn tatashi." And then my mother said, "This is nish man tatashi."
That was when they got off the boat. They got close. Yeah.
How he felt. He didn't see his little daughter for 5 years, and she
Never saw her.
They made up very
She was
well.
born
Her
after
before
you
they
left.
left. She was born before they left.
She was born.
Yeah.
after you left?
Yes, she was definitely born before they left. She was about 2 years old when he left.
Right.
But I also remember, and correct me if I'm hearing this story wrong, that Uncle Ralph was on that same boat. Do you remember Uncle Ralph? Uncle Ralph was
remember Uncle
Bubby's.
Ralph.
I remember Uncle Ralph. I didn't know he was on that
Wait,
boat.
Who's Uncle
That's
Ralph?
and Uncle Ralph was so sick on the boat. They were in steerage class. They were down, and it was like a 2-3 week trip on the boat. You didn't get there in 11 hours.
Remember
So
the
he
name of the boat? You remember the name of the boat?
The
Somebody
Susquehanna.
has the ticket.
Susquehanna.
Yeah, I did a whole report. I spoke to Tante
Somebody has
Betty,
the ticket.
to your mother. I did a whole report on her. She was telling me also about how during the war, she remembers going into the market with her mother, and there were just dead soldiers just strewn, and people that had died of starvation, that the bodies were just in the middle of the market, and they would have to step over them. And she says she remembers seeing people that were just starving, and she remembers clutching her mother's hand and stepping over the bodies. And then she was telling me about how when she came over on the boat, she was lucky. There's this rich woman who used to take her up to the top deck, I don't know, every day, but a lot, to be able to give her fresh air, and until they made it to America. Who is this Uncle Ralph that you mentioned?
That's Chaya Raizel's brother.
Ralph is Chaya Raizel's brother. Uncle Ralph at one point lived in Baltimore, and he
His
opened.
name was Raphael. Ralph was Raphael.
Okay.
I was going to get to that. Let me just tell you, she had, as far as I know, four siblings.
Who? Chaya Raizel?
Raphael, who was Ralph, Uncle Ralph, and Toba, that was Tilly.
Tante Tilly.
And then Yitta Fega, who Fege's named after, my sister. And
Did we ever know? Wait a second. Did we ever know Fega?
No, I don't think Yitta Fega made it out of Europe, as far as I remember.
Okay.
I know Ralph and Tilly made it out of Europe. I don't know about that. There was also a sender, and I've always wondered whether he had died. He was killed maybe, by the Nazis or something. No, couldn't have been that.
Can't be Nazis.
No, it was before the war.
We're talking World War I.
I wonder if my father was named Sender after him also. I don't know.
Well, that could be.
It's possible.
Who's been seeing?
I don't know that we had been seen earlier. Maybe they just liked the name. I don't know.
But I remember Bubby Chaya Raizel telling me the story that her brother Ralph was so sick on the boat that they were just praying that he should live to die on land, because if not, the people who were dying on the boat, threw them overboard. They just threw them overboard, and they didn't want him to be eaten by the fish. They wanted to be able to bury him when on land. But thank God,
Burial at sea.
Uncle Ralph, pardon me?
It's called burial at sea. Yeah, they call it.
Right. So she wanted Ralph to survive long enough to be buried in America. But in the meantime, Uncle Ralph did good. He did very well. He became our rich uncle. He had a department store. He had twin children, Leslie and Priscilla.
I grew up thinking that I was Leslie Weinberg. That's how I grew up.
You got all the hand-me-downs?
No, because my clothing had labels in it. Even the socks, each sock, the right sock and the two socks both had a little label, Leslie Weinberg. So I figured that must be me. That's what I wear.
Oh, that's cute. That's cute.
Are we still in touch with? Are we in touch with them?
We have been in there for weddings and things in the past, years ago.
And then there was Aunt Rebecca.
Aunt Rebecca.
Also-
Now, who was she? Was she Ralph's wife or something? How was
No.
No, she was Schendel's daughter.
Oh, really?
Dr. Schendel's daughter.
I did not know that.
Who was Ralph married to? I remember Ralph was married to somebody. Lee?
Lee.
Lee.
My goodness, I can't remember. I can't remember my great-grandchildren's names, and I remember Lee. I remember going down to Baltimore to visit.
You did? I
And
never went down there.
I went to, I'm young.
I
I'm
never
older
even
than-
said thank you for the socks.
So anyway, that's what I remember from Europe. Okay? But she did love her father. My mother was
Oh, my goodness.
madly in love with her father.
Well,
I have a story to tell about that. Maybe
Zaidi
you know
came
the story.
when Zaidi came to America, she said, "This is Nishman Tatashi," and then they lived in Baltimore, and there was a sink there that was very, very filthy, and my mother scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed till she made the sink.
The black sink turned white.
turned
Made it
white.
white. It was
And
a no,
then-
I'm not kidding. It was a porcelain sink, but it was so dirty it looked like black or
You couldn't
gray.
even tell. And then
And she scrubbed it
Zaidi
with
kissed
steel wool.
each of my mother's fingers, and that was the.
Oh, Heshy, you got to know how to tell a
love of it.
story.
What's
What's
with the
that?
finger?
Came over after she had finished it. He noticed what she was doing and waited. When she finished and the sink was all done, her fingertips were bleeding from the steel wool. He came over to her. He took her two hands like this, and he kissed each. Just how she mamish did it.
Yeah.
Kissed all 10 fingers. She says, "That's
Right.
when I fell in love with my father."
Right.
Right. But she was very in love with her father.
Oh yes.
She absolutely adored him. She
I
says,
remember Zaidi's funeral.
Me too.
We had a
Really?
whole mommy
I
back
don't
from
remember.
jumping in.
I
I
don't
remember
know.
when
Yes.
they carried him out and were downstairs on Hopkinson Avenue, and she screamed, "Tata!" And your mother screamed. I mean, it was heartrending how she screamed.
Now I remember that. Chitaka wanted to jump into the kever. But I also remember he was very sick. He had cancer, no?
Yeah,
Yes.
stomach.
Liver.
Well, it affected
Whatever.
his eating. He could.
Something in that
My
department.
father's comment was that my father said, "Quote: My father died of starvation." He says, "You think people don't die of starvation anymore in the world? My father died of starvation."
Well, that's
he
because
said that regarding me batzama. From the Yom Kippur davening, me bachanik.
it didn't mean that there was a famine. It
Right,
meant that
Rav.
his body could not absorb the food.
It means he starved to death because he couldn't process
Because
food.
he couldn't eat.
So,
But I remember at that point, my father already had diabetes and he was giving himself injections. And because he knew how to give injections, they elected him to give the morphine injections to my grandfather, to Zaidi Shia. And it was such a difficult thing for him to do because he didn't want to hurt him. But he was able to give him the injection. And I remember him pointing to his thigh when he gave Zaidi the injections. The morphine. But he was the one who got elected to give the
because
injections.
my father wasn't allowed to do it. You can't be making
Right,
a
you
with
can't-
your father. So
right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, but that would not have drawn blood. I thought it was a child that's not allowed to.
No, it could.
Yeah, it
blood
could draw
from-
blood. It could.
Yeah, it
Giving
does.
it
There's no choice. You could do it, but if better not.
Okay.
Wow.
Next.
Yeah.
Uncle Ralph.
I just wonder, what was the name of the boat that they came on? Somebody said that?
Susquehanna. The Susquehanna.
Susquehanna.
Yeah,
Somewhere there was a ticket. We had the ticket of the boat. I don't know where it is.
We had. You can go onto the.
Just in.
Go. I don't know why
Yeah, I did a report. I went to Ellis Island, and you could go online to all the Ellis Island that were brought in.
We
I
got
think
the
that's what-
lading. They had a list of all the
Flying flat,
passengers on the ship, on the Susquehanna, and you had.
Is that a picture?
But it was Ratza, R-A-C-A was how their last name was, and I think it was Rivka, and I think Bobby was.
Rose.
How they wrote it, huh?
I think it
know
was
it-
Rose. I
know,
think
but it-
Rose was the name that she had on her checking account.
That may. I don't think that was the name on that lading. I think it was more of a European spelling of Rose.
Okay.
Rosa maybe or something like that.
Adatsa. Well, Adatsa was the last name.
Ratzel was the last name. Yeah.
What was her name?
Whose name?
Chaya Raizel.
Tante Betty.
No, Rivka.
Rebecca. And so she went by Raize?
No. She went by
No,
Betty.
Always
went
by
Betty.
Betty. So what was Raize? Earlier somebody was saying a story how they said Raize.
Heshy, you
Chaya
said something.
Raizel. We were talking about Raizel. Talking about
Yeah.
Raizel's sister was Raizel.
Raizel's sister was
That's
Raizel.
one of Chaim Yeshua's sisters.
Chaim Yeshua's
Chaim
sister.
Yeshua's sister was Raizel.
Yes.
Chaim
Right.
Yeshua's sister was
sister.
Raizel.
Chaya Raizel's sister can't be Raiza. So it must have been Zadie's.
It was Zaydis. Zaydi again had 4 siblings that I know of: Shendel, Yosefusha, Avram, and Raiza.
Okay. Well, who's Avram? I don't know anybody named Avram.
I have a son, Avram.
And who's named after that Avram?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's also named after one of Toby's uncles.
Also Avram.
No, but he was alive. That Uncle Avram was alive.
Oh, he was. Yeah, you're right. So it wasn't him. So it was just Avram.
I
Oh,
met him.
Svardim.
I met
Unless
Uncle
I was
Avram.
maybe I was Sephardi at the time.
Svardim named their children after. I remember, Heshy, you told me a story. Jonathan wanted to name his child after you. Because
I
it's
said no thanks.
right. I'm still alive. Okay.
Wow. So there were 3 siblings, and a 4th one that died at 2, right? We have my grandfather, Tante Betty, and Uncle Louie, and then we have
Uncle Louie.
and then the little boy that.
Whatever happened with Uncle Louie's children, Eddie and Jeffrey? Is anybody in touch with them?
They're in California.
Not both. No, only Jeffrey's in California. Eddie is in Long Island.
Connecticut.
Is anybody in touch with them?
Yeah, we've been in touch. They came even to some weddings.
Yes, there was a time that even with Ruchel,
No, I'm not talking about 20 years ago. I'm talking about 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
They were both at the funeral, Uncle Louie's funeral.
Whose
Yeah.
wedding did they come to 4 years ago? I don't
Actually,
think
you
they
made a
came to my
that they
wedding.
came to.
I don't think so.
Actually,
I
you
got-
made a wedding that they came to, right? You remember?
I don't remember.
Remember?
Could be.
Yes.
I don't think they came to my wedding, and I got married.
I don't think they came
13
to any
years
of my
ago.
children's weddings. I don't think so. But
I remember sitting next to Ed at somebody's wedding. So
I know. It
I
was
don't know
only
what
Ed, by the
we
way.
did,
It was not Jeff. Jeff didn't come to. But there's a funny story with Jeff.
Okay.
Because I kind of reached out to them, to him. He was in California at the time. And I came into a company in Manhattan. When I was working in the city 10, 15 years ago, whatever, something like that. I came into a company that I had to visit for whatever reason on business. And I give my name, Yossi Raice, and the secretary looks up, she says, Raice? She says, are you by any chance related to Jeffrey Raice? I said, yes, because that's, it's not a common name, Raice. I said, yes. I said, that's my cousin. She looks at me, she says, are you bad, like Jeffrey?
Yes.
You what?
bad
Are
like
you
Jeff.
bad, like Jeff? I said, no, I'm a simple country boy.
Wow. So Uncle, what was the story? I remember hearing some stories that Uncle Louie, he was born in America, right?
Yep.
Yes.
He was
So
the
you
first one.
recognize this picture?
He was the younger brother of, who's that picture of?
Alta. Of
Was
Alta.
Oh, that's my father, yeah. I can see it.
He was your father's younger brother.
Yes. My father was also born in America. They're both born in
Yes.
America.
Well, sure. The only one born in Europe was my mother.
Right, exactly.
Wait, so Uncle Louie was the youngest?
Yeah.
Yes.
So how did he end up fighting in World War II and not?
He got drafted.
No,
Did they?
your father
No.
tried to join. Your father tried to.
I'm the
enlist.
tried
My
to
father
join,
tried
not
to
Louie.
join several times.
Right.
My father
Even
went
when-
and they rejected him because he had very, very poor sight. He was
poor,
very,
poor,
very,
poor vision.
very nearsighted. Yeah.
He even went down to Baltimore because he heard that in Baltimore they weren't as particular about it, and he tried it there, and they turned him down also.
Right.
But Louis did not.
And then what happened? And then what happened was he got married, and a couple of months later he got a draft notice. He said, "I don't want to go now. When I wanted to go, they didn't want me. Now they want me. I don't want to go." So he went down to the draft board, Whatever, he got the the date and time to show up. He went down there. He said, I can't come now. He said, I tried to enlist a couple of times, but you don't want me. He said he figured he'll fail under his glasses. But by that time, the way he told it, by that time they needed more cannon fodder. So they accepted him. He passed the physical, and he ends up in front of a desk where there's a guy from the Army and a guy from the Navy, the recruiting officer. And they say, okay, son, where do you want to go, Army or Navy? He said, I want to go home. They said, you can't go home. You're in the Army now, boy. And he said, I can't be in the Army. He said, I just got married. So he said, so what? Lots of people just got married. He said, yeah, but it's a religious limitation. You're not allowed to dress somebody who in his first year after his marriage. They looked at each other. They looked at each other. You ever hear that? He said, I never heard of it. And there was a what do you call it?
Chaplain.
Chaplain passing by. I don't even know which religion, but a chaplain. They said, Chaplain, come here a second. You ever hear about this thing? He says in the Bible, it says that you can't take a guy into the Army for 1 year after he's married. And the chaplain said, yeah, there actually is such a thing. They said, really? They said, yes. They said, okay, reject.
And
by the time a year was up, the war was up.
Not only that, but I have a vineyard that I didn't get the grapes from, and I have a house that I didn't live in.
But that's the story. That's how it happened. My father told me that story.
But why was he so against going? He was dying to get in. And then
he was married. He was just gotten married.
Oh, he just got married. That's the reason. Yeah.
That's funny.
But Uncle Louie
was probably drafted, or maybe he volunteered. Maybe he enlisted. I don't know.
How much younger was Uncle Louie?
They were very close to me.
2 years, maybe? What do you think?
I think 2 years. That's how I recall.
How much?
Maybe 2 years or so.
Not much. Not much. They were very close in age.
Yeah.
On Louie's tombstone, it says Liza she. Not Eliezer, Liza she.
Okay, she.
Okay. Liza she?
Liza,
Liza
maybe
she,
just
like
plain
the
Liza.
diminutive of Liza?
There's no Eliezer.
Right, I'll say that again. Liza she?
No, he said Liza. He changed it from Liza she.
Liza. Not Eliezer, Liza. Because that's what they called him.
That's what they called him.
As I recall,
his army stories that he told us when he used to come when after my father had passed away, and we were young guys schlepping around with the shefa we had the appetizing we opened up. So he came, I think on two occasions to help us out to give us some guidance. I figured my dead brother's kids. I'll try to. Although he was had been pretty distant for some time, but then he came. And while he was there, we always loved him. We remember him from Saratoga when he used to come.
He was my favorite. He was my favorite uncle.
It was charming. He was very charming.
Yes,
so he told us stories from his army experience, like when he was recruited or volunteered, but when he was in first basic training, he was in a barracks with a bunch of shkotzim, obviously, primarily. And the guy in the next bed from his next cot from his was a southern cracker. And he didn't like Jews, and he thought this guy's Jewish, and they were sitting on the side of their bunks, sitting on their bunks facing each other, and he takes his knife and he throws it into the ground. There was a wooden barracks, and sticks it into the ground, not too far from Louie's foot. And then he reaches up and picks it up and throws it again, and a little closer, The third time he did it, Louie says, I reached down, I picked it up, and I threw it at him, and it hit into the wall behind him, and it was flapping against his cheek. Neither he nor anybody else ever started up with me again.
And it was just a lucky thing.
He says, I would have killed him. He said, I would have been happy to kill him. He was a little hot-tempered at that point.
There's an interesting thing about Louie also, when he came into the army, and they serve him this first meal, and it's obviously treif, chazer treif, and he looks up at the ceiling. That's where God lives. And he says to God, God, if you don't want me to eat this treif of food, give me a sign. Make me nauseous, make me vomit, give me diarrhea, make me sick, and I'll know that you don't want me to eat this treif of food. So he ate the treif of food, and nothing happened. He felt just fine. And that was the end of his kashrus. That's the way he tells the story. But I remember getting, they had these special blue little letters, blue stationery, very lightweight stationery that he used to write letters on.
Aerograms.
Air letters. The air letters.
Aerograms. A-E-R-O.
Yeah.
Aerograms. Yes, that's what he used to send letters in. He was a nice guy. He said he came to visit. He came to pay a shiva call. I forget who he was sitting shiva for, but he came to pay, and he came just when nobody else was there. And he tells the story that all his life he felt like he was standing with his nose up against the window, trying to get in, and he was always the last one out. Everybody, he says, my father used to say to me, I'll say to Alta, Kimaher lama lernen. Let's sit down, let's learn together. He never said to me, Laser, Kimaher lama lernen. I mean, I could understand probably Laser didn't want to learn, but he always felt like he was the odd man out, that he was not part of
the outside looking in, yeah.
That's the expression he felt like. That's how he always felt, like he was not part of the accepted part of the family. And
I was just telling Yossi today that I was interviewed by my granddaughter, Chava. She had to do some things. Anyway, when we were in Saratoga Springs, and Zadie only wanted to learn with me. He didn't want to learn with Yossi or Moshe, only with me. And I would look at Yossi and Moshe playing with Rex, the dog from next door. And I was stuck learning with Zadie. So I was on the inside looking at
and wishing I could be on the outside.
I was envious of the boys.
Go call Yossi and Moshe. I want to go play ball.
No, he only liked to learn with me.
Well, you were a little older, so you probably.
Maybe I was a little older.
Yossi and Moshe had the reputation, of being the mazikim. Whatever we touch, we
Well,
broke.
anyway, Yossi.
And I also learned with Zadie. I want you to know why I learned with Zadie, because I had interviewed to get into Central. Central was just starting, and I was interviewed by Dr. Belkin. No, Dr. Belkin, Dr. Louie, and I passed everything else, but he felt I was still weak in my Limudei Kodesh, which is true because I was competing against girls who had gone to Crown Heights Yeshiva, and I had gone to Hebrew school. I went to Beth Jacob Hebrew School, where all the other girls are quoting psukim from Chumash, and I was saying Modani. What did I know? So Dr. Lewin interviewed me, and he said, I'm going to test you again in September. I want you to study Parshas Bereshis with Rashi. And I'm going to test you on Parshas Bereshis with Rashi when you come back in September. So I went to Zadie, and I said, Zadie, we got to learn Chumash together. And every afternoon, Zadie and I sat on the porch in Saratoga Springs. I remember there was a little corner in the porch, and that's how we sat and we studied. And it was so much fun because I was reading, not Sfardit, but I was reading, Baruch Atah, and he was saying Baruch Atah, and he got such a kick out. I remember his laugh. Do you remember his laugh? He had a totally silent laugh. He did not laugh out loud, but he chuckled and his shoulders shook, but it was a silent laugh. And I remember he got such a kick out of learning with me, out of listening to my Hebrew, but how we got along together, and that was very nice. I enjoyed that. There was an opportunity. See, Heshy, you didn't want to learn, and I learned. And
well,
Dr. Lewin
I
accepted.
was watching Yossi and Moshe playing with Rex.
Yeah.
I often thought, I was born right after the war. When I was born, and you were born before that, I was born after the war, and I was thought about what my Zadie's emotional state had to have been. I mean, he had just found out a year before or whatever, shortly before that, his whole family, all his siblings and all their children, had all been massacred. They would been buried in a huge grave together. I mean, buried alive, we were told, and how. What an emotional state he must have been in. I mean, his parents, Baruch Hashem, had died before the war, but his
Baruch Hashem, they died.
Hashem, they didn't have to see all that. But his siblings, a whole group of, and all their children, and their grandchildren. I mean, a whole family was slaughtered.
Who were his siblings? Who was Zadie's siblings?
I went over this already. He had Yossi,
Avraham.
Right? Very good.
Oh, so they.
I thought you said those were Rivka's, his mother's siblings.
No.
Shendel was Zadie's sister.
I don't think so. Yeah,
She looked
Shane
just
was
like
Zadie's
Zadie.
sister, and Yosefushin, Avram. These were my father's uncles who didn't make it out of Europe.
Uncles, not his
So,
brothers.
Huh?
Not his brothers. So these were not his siblings. These were his uncles. These were not his siblings.
Oh, really? So maybe they were, okay, his uncles. So he had no siblings? He had no siblings? I thought, I
No,
haven't
you-
written
you
down
just
the
said
names of his name.
He had
Tante
Dr.
Shendel
Shendel.
was a
And
sister.
Shendel is definitely, she's on that same list with Yosef Moshe, Avram and Raices. So I've been under the impression that they were his siblings, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Maybe they were his uncles. Could be.
But Heshy says he knows for a fact that Shendel was his sister.
They looked exactly
Okay.
like each other.
That's true,
Dr.
but that's
Shendel.
not a proof. Their
No,
family.
that's not a proof.
Anyway, and I have next to Chaya Raizel all those names, which I think they were the brothers and sisters of our grandparents. You know who Perel's mother was?
I give up.
Huh?
I give up.
It's the name we have in the family.
The
Chanaleah.
Bubba Chanaleah.
Bubba Chanaleah.
She
You know how
lived
old
a
she
very
was?
long time.
Over 100. Over 100. And when she
Which-
died,
Who's Dr. Nagel?
and before she died, she called her one of her. You know the story? You all know the
No.
story?
No, I don't know that.
Bela.
Who's the Bubba Chanaleah?
That's Perel's
Perel's
mother.
mother. Perel of the picture,
Me.
your namesake.
Her mother?
Her mother was the Bubba Chanaleah.
Okay, and she lived till 100, yeah.
Over 100. And when she was on her deathbed, she called over her son and she told him, Guy famachestir. So he went and he closed the door. And then she said, no, Guy effanufestir. So he thought she's losing it already, But all right, he'll humor the old lady. So he goes back and he opens the door. And she says, Azoi geit das ganze Leben. Azoi wie me effentatir und vermachtatir. The ganze Leben geit das Azoi. And then she said her famous aphorism. She said, Eins, zu hinderten eins, es ist als eins.
Oh, that's a cute line. It's not true, but it's a good
Which son was she talking to?
I don't have a list of Perel's, siblings, except for Tzvi. Tzvi was the only sibling of Perel that I know about. Maybe it was Zayda Herschel. I don't know. I don't have that detail, but I just know that story. Eins, zu hinderten eins, es ist als eins.
Okay. I guess when you get to be 100.
I was going to say, with your comment, you're not 100 yet. You're still a spring chicken.
Listen, Shlomo HaMelech said the same thing. When he was a young man, he wrote Shir HaShirim. And when he was an old man, he said, Hakol Hevel Havalim. Everything is nothing. But he was an old man. So
Okay, so she was an old lady. She was passing on the wisdom of her age down to her son.
Or maybe she
Okay.
was referencing there's a beautiful Torah from the Baal Shem Tov about how 101, right? Because it says, what's the difference between learning something 100 times and 101 times? And to say 101, because everything is about the one. Right? Everything. You could learn something 1,000,000 times. You could do all the mitzvahs, but it's all about, are you connected to the one in your life? That's why Hilchas Shabbos is all about Arboim Chaser Achas. You're missing the one. You're missing Hashem, who's the one that the one in the world. So maybe she kind of, it would make sense, right? The Polish Chassidim.
okay, that's a good story.
So
Nobody knows.
who you said that they were all killed by the Nazis? Zayd's parents, Chaim Yeshua's parents were killed.
No,
They died
Zayd's
before the
parents
war?
died in the 20s. They did not make it to the war.
Really? How do you know that?
How do I know that? I deduced it. Because you look at who's named after them. And when they were
Okay,
born.
Doctor. I remember that Zaidi made in the Chester Street Stiebel a Kiddush for yard site for his, I thought for his parents. I don't remember who. So his daddy, I said, what's the day? He says, no, my daddy is telling me about Zaidi that he did not know the date that they died. And there was a shmur, he says that he first found out about it later. And he picked the day and he said, this is the day that he's going to keep yard site. So it wasn't really that was the day, but that was the day that he chose.
Okay. I don't
So
know
I
what that has
don't
to
know.
do with
No,
how, when they died.
They died in the war.
So I
No,
thought that they
didn't die
died in the
I'm
war.
telling you that they couldn't have died in the war.
It could have been anyway. There wasn't any phones. He got a telegram that they died.
Right. There was no way to find out the date.
No, he found out.
But who's
he
named
found out
after?
later, Tata.
What?
Right.
Heshy, what year were you born?
43.
45.
40?
43.
43.
Are you
Okay,
sure?
And you're named after Tzvi, after Herschel Chaim Yeshua's father.
Yes.
Okay? Uncle Louie is named after Laser, after Booby's father.
Yes.
Laser,
Okay.
Louie was born when? What year was Louie born in?
Much
knows?
before me.
Much before you. No, well, my father was born, what, in 23? My
Something
father was
like
born in
that,
1923. He would have been 100. He would have been 100 in another 3 years. My father's born in 23, and Louis was born, let's say 25, 26. That's all it could be. And he was named after Laser. So Laser had to be dead already. And that's 10 years before the Nazis, came around.
Okay.
I'm saying they didn't make it to the war. And Perel, I mean.
Lucky that they died before.
Yeah. What year were you born, Perry?
36.
36. So, and you were named after Perel. So she was gone by 1936. So I'm just saying that I know that they did not make it to the war. They weren't killed in the war. However, their children, their siblings families definitely were killed during the war. Whoever
Okay.
didn't make it out, except the ones that made it to Haifa.
Or both.
Oh, so who made it to Haifa?
Well, we had a picture of it, of some of them that we got. You have that picture, right, Moshe?
I think I do, yeah.
And I think it had names on the back. Did it have names written on the back that Booby wrote? Somebody wrote. We have it, and it had names on the back, written on the back,
Who was Hanalea married to? Bubba Hanalea.
I have no idea. It's all I have here. I mean, you can see it if I don't know if you can read it. It's over here. It's all just one name stuck up in the in the corner. That's above Perel. That's all I know. See, I should have started asking these questions 25 or 50.
Yeah, there's a lot of this that we're not getting this. You know why Shira's named Shira? My daughter Shira?
No.
Because she was our third daughter, and it didn't seem to me like I was ever going to have a son. And my grandfather's Chaim Yoshua, who was called,
Shia.
what was he?
Shia. Shia.
So Shia was what he was called. So Shira was the closest I was going to get to having a son named Shia.
You could have done Sheila. Sheila is very close to Sheila.
But I need a Hebrew name.
Hebrew name, yeah.
Sheila is not a Hebrew name.
No.
So we from Shia, we named her Shira.
Shira. That's close.
Yes. Okay.
Does he
But I
recognize who
remember
this is?
very vividly stories from Saratoga.
Oh, at Dina and her husband. What's the name? Yeah.
Yeah.
Saratoga stories. Oh, yeah. We have great
Give me
stories in Saratoga. We practically lived in Saratoga in the summer. We were there.
You were there the whole summer.
Yeah.
Of course.
It was wonderful.
Okay. Tell me some Saratoga stories. I got good stories from Saratoga. Tell me some Saratoga stories.
I tell them the story about how we traumatized Faggy.
No, how did you traumatize Faggy?
Well, I must have been around 8, I'm guessing, and Moshe was about 6, or maybe he was 7 and 9, or 8 and 10, something like that. And Faggy was, maybe 3 or 4, whatever she was. And we had Rex there. We had a lot of interactions with Rex, a lot of stories with Rex. Anyway,
well, Rex,
and I got the idea in my head.
Rex belonged to a dry cleaners around the corner.
That's
and they
correct.
were very busy in the summertime. So they let Rex go free. So Rex became our dog.
And Rex loved us. As soon as we arrived,
Yes.
he was there for the whole summer.
Right.
So I got the idea that it would be a great idea to put my sister, who was the right size, and give her a ride on Rex, like the pony ride. I thought that was, and I said, she'll love it. Rex will be great, So I got Moshe to work with me and try to so we lift her up and Rex is squirming and moving and I'm holding Rex and no, put her on now, put her on. And Rex is finally starts snapping and twisting and he didn't like the idea at all. And she was shrieking. She liked it less than Rex did. And I'm saying, no, you're going to have such a good time. You'll see it's going to be great. Just give me a chance. Anyway, I never got it to happen. And Faggy was traumatized. She's so afraid of dogs all her life. And Rex forgave me, actually, very soon. Rex didn't hold a grudge.
Rex was very tolerant. I remember Bubby saying to Rex, Rex, go home. Go home, Rex. But
Did he listen?
She spoke Yiddish. She spoke Yiddish to Rex. Do
You
you
know
know?
the story when we had Rex under the table?
No.
Yeah.
Moshe and I, or I anyway, I'll take the blame. Okay. We smuggled Rex under the dining room table on Shabbos because there was a lot of food we didn't like. You know, we didn't like vegetables and other stuff. So we figured when we get something we don't like, so we don't, you know, you can't say I don't want to eat that. You know, Bubby got very insulted. My mother would start yelling at me. So we would just take it off and slip it under the table. And Rex would eat it up, whatever it was. He had no taste, I'm telling you. No good taste. And he would eat it up. This was going great for a little while. It went really wonderfully. Then all of a sudden, Bubby felt he must have brushed his tail against her leg or something. She said, what's it this? And she picks up the thing and she said, ah, the Hund is in the Tisch. And she said, never raise the Hund, never raise the Hund. So we had to take poor Rex out, not, no, there are your girls. Perrie.
Perrie, you see it?
What about?
You see the picture?
A picture of what?
Of your three girls.
In the Mark Race window, you don't see a picture?
I see Yehuda and Heshy and Joseph. I don't see Mark.
Oh, that's why you don't see the picture.
Oh, okay. So let's see.
Wait a second.
I
got Mark now. I got Mark now.
Put it back, Moshe. Put it back.
Oh, yeah, that's my three girls. Yep. I know those dresses.
That's funny.
I remember those dresses. Do you remember that our grandmother, Chaya Raizel, washed ice cubes?
Should we use them?
Whenever she took an ice cube from the freezer, she would rinse it off under the sink, under the cold water.
I do that too. If it's been standing in the freezer for a while, I rinse it off.
Why did she wash ice cubes? I said to her, Bubby, why are you washing ice cubes? The ice
so
cubes
they should be clean, of course.
Well, it turns out that in those days, they got ice delivered. The apartments that they rented in that, on Saratoga was an apartment. No, it wasn't an apartment house. What did you call it? A rooming house. A rooming house, and they rented apartments, and each of the apartments had an ice box. They didn't have a refrigerator. They had an ice box. And every day the Iceman come, remember?
Oh, once a week. Once a week, not every day.
I don't know how often, okay? It wasn't how often. But the Iceman cometh, and the Iceman had these huge blocks of ice that were covered with a burlap blanket. It was very thick, scratchy burlap.
Keep them from melting.
That's how to keep it from melting. It was insulated. And when he would bring it into the house, he would take these ice tongues and chop it up a bit and put it into the thing. And then Zadie would take these ice things and break them into smaller pieces and bring them into each of the rooms for the for the ice cube, for the ice box. And now here comes the PG rated. And one day he walks in he knocks on the door and nobody answers, and he opens the door, and there's a couple to whom he had rented the apartment, and they're having a little matinee, whatever it is. So he quickly slammed the door behind him, and the next day he went out, he got rid of all the ice boxes and bought refrigerators. But that's the reason Bubby.
You know what year that was? Could you pin the year on that? What year would that was?
How could I possibly pin the year? I was a little girl. What did I know?
Okay, because I remember.
But that's why Bubby washed ice cubes, because she washed the ice cubes from the burlap that dirtied up the ice cubes. Okay, go ahead. What do you remember?
There's another reason for rinsing an ice cube, by the way. When an ice cube is not rinsed, sometimes if you touch liquid to it, like if you touch your tongue to it, it can stick. It can actually freeze your tongue to it. But once you rinse it off, that doesn't happen anymore. So
don't stick your tongue on the ice cube.
Well, if you
I don't wash ice cubes. I do not wash ice cubes. As a matter of fact, I have an ice maker in my refrigerator.
Your mother would be scandalized. You don't wash ice cubes.
With a little bleach, a little Clorox, a little.
Perrie, can you see this picture?
Wait, I have to go to the. Yes.
That's Ralph.
Okay.
Cut off over here on the side. That's Ralph.
That's
the one that's half there. Yeah, that's true. I recognize him.
That's Ralph, and I don't know who this is. I don't remember.
It looks like Davy.
Who's
Heshy,
Davy?
you remember Davy?
Yeah, but that doesn't look
This
like
is
David.
me. This picture, this kid on the side is me.
Really?
I don't
I
know
don't
who
see
the
it.
woman is. This is Ralph.
I could see that looks like you, Taka.
Yeah, and it looks
I
like
know,
it looks
it's
like
me.
your son Bensi, and it looks like your grandchildren. So it's got to be you.
But who
Where
is
do
the
you
lady
see a
in the
woman?
middle?
I don't see a woman.
In between
Yeah.
Ralph and the little kid.
I only
Like
see
you
two
hold it
boys.
still. What?
I only see two boys. I don't see a woman.
I think that's a woman.
The one with the longish hair, or not that long, but that's a woman.
I
yeah.
don't see it's not such a big picture.
The suit.
Okay.
I don't see
Yeah,
a
the
whole
suit.
Do you see
I
Ralph?
see the suit. I see a person in a suit. Who's that?
Yeah.
That's Ralph?
Yeah, Uncle Ralph.
No, that's a lady.
No. The one that's almost torn off, half torn off, that's Ralph.
Okay, I'm not seeing it. I'm
Why did
trying
they
to-
tear? Why did
Maishi,
they
lift
tear
it up
Ralph?
a little bit higher. Lift it up a little, Maishi. Up a little more. Maishi, up. You see
Ah.
there's a pair of legs that are not wearing pants? That's a woman.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, now you know that's a woman.
Okay. But who's the one to his right?
Good is enjoying this. her right, you mean? Or
Her right.
left? Huh?
All right.
Her right is Uncle Ralph.
Maishi, move the picture a little bit more to the left. That's right. A little bit more.
You can't see anything.
I don't see anything.
I don't see Ralph.
How can you not see Ralph?
I don't know.
Which
He's
one
right
is-
there. I see him clearly.
Sitting next to the
I
woman
see a
in the
hat.
skirt.
You see the hat? You see the
I see
hat?
a
The
hat.
hat's on top of Ralph's. You see the glasses?
Yeah, it looks like.
Right under the glasses, there's a nose.
Yeah, the nose.
That's
But who's
Ralph.
the little boy?
That's Maishi.
That's me.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
If you say
Hopkinson
so.
Avenue.
Oh, I remember Hopkinson Avenue. Hopkinson and Laguna.
Yeah.
Ruby called it Laguna. Not Livonia, but Laguna.
Yep.
We lived on Hopkinson and Laguna.
Yep.
I remember Sutter and Chester.
I do too.
I
Yeah.
remember Sutter.
I remember
Sutter
that.
and Chester.
We had a neighbor there in one of the apartments there who I was kind of friends with.
Who
her
are those
son.
two people? Maishi, who are those two people?
That's
Maishi,
my
you're
mother.
disrupting the stories here.
But this is
Put
our
it closer.
family.
Move
Put
it
it
closer to
closer.
the
Put it closer.
Closer
Move
to
it
the.
clo-
Move
Move
it
it
closer.
closer.
That's
Closer.
That's your
Mommy and
mother?
Tante Esther.
Yeah,
Oh, there's your mother.
Mother
I
and her
see.
sister.
two sisters.
And that's Tante Esther.
Yep.
Right.
And then I remember, where's the Gruskins fit into this?
Well, Schleimer was a brother of my mother and Esther, and
Oh,
Itchy-
Esther was Schleimer's wife? No,
Esther
that was
sister.
Gittel.
Esther was Schleimer's
Gittel.
sister.
Right, Gittel was Schleimer's
Gittel
wife.
was Schleimer's wife, right?
When did they come to Europe? I mean, to America.
Who, the
One more
Gruskins?
picture of the family.
But I think they were all born in America. I don't think they came to America. Their parents came to America.
Who are
Who's
those
that?
three women? Maishi, who are those three women?
That's my mother.
I see your mother on the
Esther.
right.
And
Who's-
then that's
I'm sorry?
Elchanan's wife is in the middle.
Elchanan's
There's
wife.
El-
One that
Elchanan Hershowitz, their son.
Yeah.
Uncle
I don't know
David's
who Elchanan is. Who's
Elchanan
Elchanan?
is my first cousin. He's Tante Esther's son. And then our next is Tante Esther again.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I was looking for a picture from Haifa, but I can't find it.
So you're going to show us all the other pictures in the stack?
I showed you all.
Oh, okay.
Yes, you were saying about a neighbor or something?
Yeah, we had a neighbor who, I don't remember their name. I think that the woman's name was Adele. That's what I kind of remember. Maybe right, maybe wrong. And this woman terrified me because when she got angry at her son, who was my friend, acquaintance, she would shriek at him, "I'm going to kill you. I'm going to murder you. I'm going to tear you limb from limb." This is the kind of thing, and I pictured her doing it. I mean, I didn't.
This was on Hopkinson Avenue, or this was
No.
on Southern?
on Sutter in the big
Sutter,
apartment house.
yes.
Hopkinson, there was just the Raices lived there. Booby and Zadie downstairs, and we lived upstairs.
Right.
And Sutter
Yes,
was an apartment
Chester,
house.
you lived downstairs and they lived upstairs.
That was the whole apartment house.
It was a whole apartment building. There must have been
Right.
12 units, I'll bet, something like
Yeah,
that.
but you lived on the walk-in and they lived upstairs.
I don't remember where we lived over there.
Anyway, okay.
But one of the neighbors in that building was this woman who had this son who she would shriek at whenever she got angry at him. I mean, maybe he was a terrible kid, I don't know. But she would shriek, "I'll kill you. I'll murder you. I'll tear you limb from limb." And he's quaking, and I'm quaking too. And I run out of there. You know, if I was playing with him, I'd run home. I'd say, I'd be crying. I was so shaken by it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember a story about you when you were a baby, you maybe a year old, you tried climbing out of your crib. Do you remember a story to that effect?
I remember hearing it. I don't remember it happening, but I remember hearing it.
Well, you were a little young. You were sleeping on the railing.
Yeah, that I remember doing, but that couldn't have been
You
that
slept
year.
on the railing of the crib.
Yeah.
That's how talented you are.
I remember doing that, but I think I was a little older than a year.
Well, however old you were still sleeping in a crib. So if you were in a crib and you were sleeping on the railing, how old could you have been? They probably took you out of the crib by the time Moshe was born. Yeah. Whatever. That was one of the, they bragged about Yossi's talent, that he slept on the railing of the crib. This is what they were so proud of. Nachas.
Remember the other thing that we did, Moshe and I both did this. In Hopkinson Avenue, there were pipes, the heat pipes were in the dining room or living room. Do you remember them on the corner of the living room?
Yeah, I remember.
And we used to climb up those pipes to the ceiling. And then, touch the ceiling, that was the big thing. And then we'd climb back down. And Bobby or somebody walked in once and we're up at the ceiling. And she looked and she started shrieking, they're climbing on the walls. The kriechen of Grachevent. She didn't notice the pipe. The kriechen of Grachevent.
Yeah. I remember
Saratoga, they once had a new range, an oven. I don't know if you remember, it was like a pale green color. Do you remember this? The big range
I remember.
with the hanging.
Where is this?
Huh?
Is this in
Saratoga?
Saratoga?
In the kitchen, in the communal kitchen in Saratoga, there was a new range once.
Okay.
It was a large range, and it had a pale green color. It was a beautiful new range, and I was fiddling around with it. I don't know how this happened anyway. And one of the handles had these dangling handles, and it broke. And I put it down on top, and I didn't know what to do.
The dangling what? A dangling
handles.
Oh, okay.
And one of them broke. Like they were probably cast iron or something. And anyway, somehow I managed to break one, and I put it on top. And then I think Bobby walked in, and she looked at it, and she said, "Oh, it's zerbrochen. Wer hat das getan?" She said. I said, and I made my famous statement. I said, "I don't know how I did it, but I did it."
Wow.
It was true. It was very true. I didn't know how I did it, but I had to confess that I did it.
You and George Washington. I chopped down the cherry tree.
Yeah.
And I told the truth. I'm trying to remember other Saratoga stories. I remember Zadie had a garden that he grew tomatoes.
Vegetables, right.
Vegetables. I remember. It was right next to the back porch. There was a little alcove there.
That's right.
Do you remember the washing machine downstairs in the basement? Where
with
the ringer, the rollers?
With
the ringer.
Uh-huh.
The ringer,
operator, you put the thing in and you try to keep your fingers.
You turn the handle. You turned the handle and it rained it out.
That's right.
Yes. And you hung things out on the line.
And the washer was round like a drum. It was not like the modern washers that are square with a drum inside. The whole thing
That's it. It was a board that you rubbed on.
What?
It was a board, like a ribbed board that you rubbed the clothes on.
That's right. But that wasn't for the washer. But yeah,
That
was the washing in the sink.
You remember the coal bin? You remember the coal bin in the back? No, that was in Hopkinson.
Yeah.
You remember coal? I don't remember coal.
Yeah.
Hopkinson Avenue. When we moved into Hopkinson Avenue, we're still getting coal
Heat
deliveries.
was cold. That's right. You
No
sure it
kidding.
was Hopkinson? Maybe it was Sutter, Moshe? Are you sure it was
No,
Hopkinson?
that was in Hopkinson, yeah. It was all the way in the back of the basement. Then he got an oil thing. We switched to oil heating.
I remember on Hughes Street, we had an ice box, and they would come and deliver ice and put it on top of the refrigerator. That was the freezer. They put the ice, and during the course of the day, the ice melted, and it went down a pipe down to the bottom of the refrigerator, and there was a drawer. You had to slide out this tray, and take out the water that had melted from the ice, and you poured it into the sink. But it took a lot of skill, because by that time the tray was filled with water, and water was very sloppy, and that was how we. But then we had something called a dumbwaiter. You remember a dumbwaiter?
Yeah.
In the apartment house, that they would come at, I don't know, 4 or 5 o'clock every afternoon, and they would ring the bell, and you would open the door, and you would put your garbage pail on the shelf, and he would, the super would let it down and threw out the garbage, and then he brought up the empty pail. That was service. We didn't carry out the garbage.
I don't remember that. We didn't have enough.
That was on U Street.
U Street in Williamsburg. That was on U Street.
I remember in U Street that you had a black fence around outside.
Yeah.
Like a little cast
Metal
iron.
fence.
What?
Yeah, metal.
Fence. Metal, right.
What, Heshy? I didn't hear you.
A black fence. Like,
about a metal fence.
I remember my mother was feeding Heshy on the windowsill, and right across the the hallway, the courtyard, there was another lady who was watching my mother feed Heshy, and she said to my mother, "Oy, shena lippalach, shena keppelach, shena beckelach, azelcha shena beckelach, shena nazelach, shena lippalach." 2 minutes later, as soon as she put him down on the floor in the living room, he pulled down the fish tank on his face, and everything that she said, the beckelach, cut the beckelach, cut the lippalach, cut the nazelach, cut the keppelach, and that's how he had. That was an iron hard. So from that time on, I believe in iron hard.
Okay.
See that?
Well, there you go. And Heshy told me that they were saber scars that he had was dueling and
Dueling, yeah. A studentenschnitt.
yeah.
No, you told me you would tell stories when you were dating. It was a bear. You were fighting with a bear. You had good stories.
Yeah.
And
I just want to. I'm reminded of a story when Booby was smuggling. So I had just gotten my license. I was 16 in a day, maybe. I just got my license, and my mother said to bring Booby to a doctor for a checkup. So I go any place. So I got into the car and I'm taking Booby. She's sitting next to me, and I'm driving to her doctor, whatever the doctor's name was, whoever it was. Anyway, I was brand new, and I went down a one-way street against me, which was not right. And there was a red light there, so I couldn't wait there because cars were trying to get in. So I went through the red light, and I made a right turn to allow the cars to go. Whoop, 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 whoop. Policeman comes right by, and he says, you went down a one-way street, and you went through a red light. So I jumped out of the car.
I don't understand how you have a red light at the end of a one-way street going the wrong way.
Well, the light was on both sides.
Here.
The light was on both sides. Anyway, kasha for my business.
No, it's for pedestrians.
I'm making it up. So I'm trying to explain myself to the policeman, and I tell the policeman I'm taking my grandmother to the doctor. So he says, really? So he gets out of his police car, he walks over to the car, sticks his head into the window, talks to Booby for a minute, and then he comes out of the car. He says, "Okay, kid, go ahead, hurry up." So I was very happy. I figured I won the lottery. So I asked Booby, what's supposed to gesagt the policeman? What did you tell the policeman? And she said, "Hum gesagt, I got a heart attack." So the guy let me go. I should have led with that argument.
You lie, and she swears to it.
I didn't lie. I didn't lie anything. I just said I'm taking it to the doctor. That's true.
She was a smuggler. She knew how to handle these things.
She knew how to handle policemen. Yes.
But it's a good thing.
Going back to the smuggling, I remember hearing the story that she had a wagon with a false bottom, and she would ride it to the border to go to smuggle stuff, and then she didn't drive it. She had to hire a shagit, and she would get out and let him go, and she would tell him, "Go, and they'll meet you over there," and then she would walk there, and in case he got stopped, they would put him.
You don't know nothing about it.
Right, or execute him. They probably don't bother with jails. They just kill him.
Oh, that's funny.
Tell a story about how you met Silly.
What's
I remember Zadie coloring Booby's hair.
Really?
You remember that?
No.
As long as Zadie was alive and well, she didn't have gray hair. He hennaed her hair.
Really?
He had a special towel that he would put the towel around her shoulders, and he would run this henna through her hair, and then he would comb it through, and that's how he colored her hair. She never had a gray hair until he got sick or died, whatever. Then she never colored her hair after that, but he did that. They were such a loving couple.
I don't know what color was the hair. It was henna color.
Henna was it was red. It
The
was
redhead.
henna colored.
Henna, I know.
Until he got
Israeli
sick and
women
died,
all
and
use henna.
then she went white like me.
Das
And she
Geguten
went
in the Bubbe.
Yeah. But I remember them to the end of their days. They were Sheila Zaya so good. Today's a she to Timirat Taiva. They were just such a loving, they held hands together. Give me a break. I remember their 50th anniversary party. My parents made them a 50th anniversary party in the apartment on Lefferts Avenue.
Yep.
But they were just such a loving couple. It was just such a nachas to see them.
You know, I played chess with Zadie, not often and not many times.
Yes.
I was very young, and I must have been like 7 or so. It was in Hopkinson Avenue already. Maybe I was 8. And if you remember Hopkinson Avenue downstairs, there was a dinette area and the kitchen. They were the same area, but kind of visually they were separated. So I was sitting Zadie was sitting with a sefer by the window, and I was sat diagonally across the table from him with my back to the kitchen area, and Bubby was pouring Zach in the kitchen, and I had lost one game, and I thought I'm playing, good, but Zadie would look at me reading his sefer, and I would tell him, Zadie, it's your turn. You take a look, take a glance at the board, make a move, turn back to the sefer. I would sit there and think for a little bit, make a move, and tell him, Zadie. And I lost the game, and then the next game, or maybe I don't know if it was the second game or some other, but it was. I'm playing, and when he looks back to the safe, Bubby comes back to me, comes over my shoulder, and she says, "Yossi, the guy do." So I I went there, and I said, "Zadie, it's your turn." So he looks at the board and he says, and he makes a move. He turns back to the safe, and then she comes in, and yet's guy do. So I made the next move, and I said, "Zadie." And he looks and he said, and he's looking and he says, Raizel, die helps them see. He knew that was not my level of play.
So I guess he taught her how to play chess too. I remember playing chess.
You knew how to play
chess?
You played chess?
I remember playing chess with him in Saratoga also on the porch. And we're playing, and I'm one move away from dying, one move away from checkmate. And I said to Zadie, Zadie says, it's going to be checkmate. I said, okay, I give up. So he took the chessboard and turned it around. And now I was on the winning side and he was on the losing side. And he said, okay, let me game weiter. Okay, 5 moves later, I'm losing again. And and once again, he did checkmate. And again, he took the chessboard and he turned it around on the other side. No matter what I did, I was losing, and he won.
Well, he was going to arrange that no matter what you did, you would win.
Well, he was trying to not let me lose. That was for sure, because I was losing each time. And each time he turned the chessboard around, and he was on the losing side, and I couldn't fix myself. But it was fun.
Yeah.
He was good. What else here? I'm running out of notes.
I have a terrible memory of doing something that I regretted almost instantaneously, and I still regret it till today. Somebody who shall remain nameless gave me
who's on one of the screens here today?
Gave me a thing, a little doohickey that had like a rubber tube that went up your sleeve, and there's a bulb in your hand, and it has a little flower that you put on your lapel, and when you squeeze the bulb, it spritzes out water from the flower.
Oh.
And this somebody convinced me that it'd be a great idea to go over to Zadie and do the trick on him. He'll love it.
I never did that.
I didn't say who. I think there's a guilty party here. So I went over to Zadie. I said, Zadie, smell my flower.
Why wouldn't I do it if I had the flower?
Yeah, you're too smart. So, and he leans over and he leans in, and I squeeze the bulb, and he gets the shot of water in his face. He gets a shot of water in his face, and he looked at me, and he turned around and walked away. And I wanted to die. I wanted to dig a hole in the floor and climb in.
I wanted to kill me.
I thought, huh?
You wanted to kill me also.
I wanted to kill you, that's true. But I wanted to kill you and then die.
And then
I felt so horrible. You remember this, obviously.
But why would you do it?
You told me to.
Told you to.
Anything you told me to do at that time, I would do.
Plow. I didn't tell you to do it on.
Actually, you once sent Yossi to the barber around the corner and he says, give him $1 and tell him to keep the change. and
we did another one with the barber, another stick with the barber. This was only a plan. We never really did this, but Heshy had this plan. He said you find a kid, that looks like a neighborhood, poor kid, and you say, kid, you want a free haircut? Yeah, come in here. So you go into the barber shop with the kid, and you get in the chair, and the barber gives you a haircut, and then you say, okay, I'll be back in a few minutes. Now do the kid. Do the boy. And the barber will give him your haircut. And afterwards he says, where's your father? When's he coming back? He said, that wasn't my father. He said, you want a free haircut, kid?
And my brother really thought the haircuts cost $1. After he was married, he would come back to his mother, and his mother would say, go around the corner, tell the barber to give you a haircut. It only cost $1.
Brooklyn.
What?
That was the cheapest barber in Brooklyn.
Yeah, right. Because she thought that you didn't want to take a haircut because it cost too much money.
Yossi, do you eat babka with raisins still?
No, never. You know why?
Why?
Yeah.
I tell them why. Because Heshy persuaded me that those little raisins in the babka were babka was the rolled thing that she used to make. What was that called? The rolled with the cinnamon and
Mandelbrot. Mandelbrot. The Mandelbrot.
With the dough rolled out, and then you cinnamon and sugar and raisins and nuts. You roll it up, and it's like a long
Rugelach.
Whatever it's called. And Heshy convinced me that those raisins are actually roaches that got into the dough, cockroaches. So I looked at that. I'm not eating that, and so I never. So Heshy, of course, it was more for him to eat. But then when Umi did, she saw I wasn't eating it, so she asked me why not. I said because I don't eat the ruzhinkis. Can ich essen the ruzhinkis? So she after that she made me my own loaf with just nuts and no raisins, chopped nuts and whatever, cinnamon and sugar. And that's what I ate. But to this day, I still don't like raisins in baked goods.
I don't like cooked raisins either. I don't like baked raisins. They're hard. I don't like them.
Don't like it.
Yehuda, you're listening to stories, Yehuda?
I'm loving it. Absolutely loving it. I'll tell you,
Okay.
I remember hearing some good stories about Uncle Louie in when he was in the army, about when he was going out, that he used to drive a truck.
Yeah.
So tell the stories. I remember the stories, but I'd rather hear them again.
Let me hear the story. I don't know these stories.
He drove an ammunition truck in the army, and they used to go in convoys. They would, Patton's army moved very, very fast. He constantly was outrunning his supply lines, so they had to have big convoys that would go back to the rear, load up with, truck gallons of fuel and ammunition, and drive it back to him to keep up with him. And Louis very quickly noticed that these convoys will always be attacked by German aircraft. They would be strafing them and shooting them, and they would blow up plenty of these tanks. And when they hit one, it was full of either fuel or it was full of ammunition. Boom, there it went, and there went the driver. So he said, this is not for me. I don't want to be with them. So he got this idea. I don't know where he got the idea. He was a shtickle mechanic later. He knew.
Yes.
Anyway, so he stuck a raw potato in the tailpipe of his truck.
Oh, how funny.
And he would then drive along, but the gases would back up in the tailpipe. And after 5, 10, 15 minutes of driving, it would kill the engine. With too much backup of gas, it couldn't ignite in the engine, and the engine would stop. Now, when that happened and you're in a convoy, they didn't stop the convoy. They told Louis, okay, you wait here till you'll get help, to fix it. We'll radio back for you, and we're going to go ahead. And he was left there alone. And then if the convoy got attacked, they didn't come to attack a single truck someplace. They would attack the convoys. And this became his modus operandi. Every time they went out on a thing, he would get his potato out, stick it in the tailpipe. So after, a few times that this happened, they said, there's something wrong with your engine. So we're going to have to send it back to the garage, and maybe they'll. So he went to the garage, the local. They had one garage that moved kind of with the moving lines, and they sent them in there. And now in the Army, a soldier or driver was assigned to a truck, and he didn't drive any other truck. That was the truck that wherever that truck went, he went with it because he was responsible for it, and he had to bring it back to use it again. So when it went into the shop, so to speak, he had to be there with it. So he got away for a day or two.
So he was off.
So he was off for a day or two, and mainly to him, it meant that he didn't have to be with the convoy for a couple of days. And as soon as they gave him the truck back, he would start off again, take out the potato, and again, it's happening. So they said, there must be a serious problem. We got to send you back to the major depot that's, all the way behind the lines, 200 miles back. He said, fine. So he drove his truck back to the depot, and he had to spend like a week or something there till they got around to it. They had lots of other things busy, higher emergencies than Louie Raice's truck. And then he came back to the front lines eventually. And again, it's as soon as he started going, same problem. So finally they said to him, all right, Race, whatever it is, you go when you can go. When your truck's ready to go, you go. We can't hold up the convoy for you. And that's how he did the rest of the war. He said he just he went when he could go. And they couldn't be too upset because he would always deliver the goods, so to speak.
Until he ran out of potatoes. No,
you can't run in the Army. You don't run out of potatoes.
Right.
That's the staple of the Army, the potatoes. At any rate, then he told us a story that when he one time after he made a delivery, he had stopped and he was talking to a couple of guys. They were in a circle, sitting around and schmoozing on the side of a mountain. And they schmoozed for 10 or 15 minutes. Then he got up and said, I got to go. He got in his truck and it worked. The potato wasn't in it. He was alone. And he, as he says, as he was driving up the road, up the mountain, a bomb came down. A stray plane came along and dropped a bomb, which landed in the middle of that circle and exploded. Or maybe it even landed first. It could be, maybe I got it, and it didn't go off. So they all dived down. And then he said, okay, it didn't go off, fine. And then he left. And as he was riding up the hill, it exploded. So it kind of, it didn't have my number. My number hadn't come up. Everybody else, they got killed, but it waited for, he used to say, it waited for me to leave.
Okay. Whatever it was, it worked.
Yeah.
Who do you have other stories about Uncle Louie?
Yeah, those are the two that I heard during from the war. Yeah. Wow,
We loved Uncle Louie. When he came, it was so amazing that he came. He showed us how to slice lox. You remember that, Moshe?
Yes.
Remember?
Do you remember he used to have a rifle in our house?
I don't recall. In our house, his war rifle.
Yeah, it was. I think it was downstairs by Bobby and Zayd. There was a laundry room or something.
You mean over there? I didn't.
Oh, he brought home a gun
yeah.
from the Army.
Yeah.
I don't think it was that rare. People brought home weapons. They brought home captured German weapons.
He did. I don't remember.
Yeah, what happened to that gun? What was it? Probably an M1.
Probably.
I don't know. I don't have it.
You got to find out who does.
I remember a helmet, a military helmet in Saratoga in that closet. Remember in the front hall, there was a big closet under the stairs. Anybody else remember this?
I remember sleeping in the attic.
You slept in the attic with us? All the boys used to sleep up in the attic.
We slept up in the attic. I remember sleeping in the attic.
That attic, we had a big bathtub. You remember the big bathtub there?
Yes,
Yes,
that was a big.
That's where my mother used to bathe groups of us, me and Moshe and Yoel Rosenfeld when he was there, all at once, pile up into the tub and clean them all at once,
Who is Yoel Rosenfeld?
Oh, that's Tante Itti's son. Sometimes we would have others that come and visit. You know the famous story when my mother's mother came to visit? This is a great story. I don't know if you
Oh, I remember. What was her name? Bubby what?
Yiddish. Her name was Yehudis. Yiddish.
Yeah.
And she came. She was a widow for many years because then she got married actually for a little while. but she was a widow and she was alone. And when we went to Saratoga, they invited her, Bobby and Zadie invited her to come for a week or whatever it might have been to, take a little vacation up with us in Saratoga. So she got on a bus. And the bus was a long ride. In those days, the ride from Brooklyn, let's say, or from
was a long ride. There was no
like 6 hours. It was like a 6-hour trip because there was no throughway. It was before the
there
throughway.
was no throughway. It was a slow ride.
It was Route 9, and there were lights along the way, and there was
The Taconic State Parkway.
What?
The Taconic was still there.
I don't remember the Taconic. I remember Route 9 was the way.
Route 9.
And anyway, so the bus came. She got on the bus, and she says to the driver, "Excuse me, could you tell me when we get to Saratoga Springs?" And he says, "Yeah, sure, lady." He says, "Sit down here behind me and I'll tell you." So 6 hours later or so, the driver says, "Okay, lady, we're coming into Saratoga now." He says, "Where would you like to get out?" She says, "Could you drop me off by the Races?" He says, by the Races? He says, "Yeah." He says, "You don't want to go to the Races." She says, "What are you talking?" He says, "You don't want to go to the Races. They'll take all your money. You'll have nothing left." So what you talking? They're such nice people. He says, "No." And then at some point it connected, that she's not talking about the racetrack.
Oh, that's such a cute story. Drop me off by the Races. Oh, that's cute.
Like as if everybody knows the Races, the bus driver must know the Races.
Do you remember going to the spa?
Of course.
Yeah, all the spots.
Of course.
The spa was
The
beautiful.
waters, all the waters. You remember the beauty water?
Yes.
I have a story about the beauty water. After I was married,
it didn't work. I tried it.
It didn't work. The first summer after we were married, Toby was the head counselor of a new camp. It was the teenage girls camp for Magen Avram Spat. It was called
Sternberg,
yeah. And so there were two, trips. Each trip went on a field trip, overnight trip. Hired a bus, and so one of them I suggested we should. I don't remember where we were going to, but I suggested let's stop in Saratoga. That's a city I know on the way up to the mountains, and I can make it interesting. So on the way up, I'm telling the girls when we're getting not too far from Saratoga, I'm telling the girls about the waters. There are a lot of waters, spas, and springs in Saratoga. It's famous for this. I said, and one of those waters is called the beauty water. And the reason is because there's a legend that any girl who washes her face in that water was going to become beautiful. And they all were listening. They were rapt, And we get to there. I said, we're at the beauty water now. And I was nearly killed in the stampede to get off that bus. I couldn't get out of the way fast enough. And they ran.
I missed the story because my phone rang, so I missed a good part of the story. Start again, back.
I'm saying we were taking these girls, this camp full of girls, a bus full of girls. Toby was the head counselor. We're taking them, and I suggested stopping in Saratoga because I know Saratoga. So I was telling them a little about it on the way, the springs, the waters, blah, blah, blah. And I told them there's one water there that's called the beauty water. And the reason for that is there's a legend that any girl who washes her face in that water is going to become beautiful. Is destined to be beautiful. I said, and when we got to that spring, the beauty water, I said, here we are at the beauty water spring. And I had to get out of the way so fast because I was nearly stampeded, run over by the stampede of girls getting off that bus. Yeah.
Didn't work.
I think it worked. I think it worked. With your case, it worked. So there you go.
Because it doesn't give instant gratification. It takes a while.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I told him. It had to be, you eventually will become beautiful from it.
I remember working in a gift shop, the Zaklikows gift shop on Broadway. And I had a summer job there. I guess I must have been a teenager already, and I had the job. And it was so interesting because it was all kind of gift items, fancy items and postcards and whatever. And I could always tell who had been to the racetrack and who won and who lost. If they won, they're standing there by the fancy things and they're choosing. If they lost, they stood by the postcards, and it was 2 cents a postcard and 3 cents a stamp in those days. But they would stand there for a long time trying to spend as little money as possible. Oh, those were good days. Remember the Schwartzes lived on the corner?
Of course. Yeah. Louie
Carol
Schwartz.
and
Myrna.
Carol.
Vernon, Carol, and Louie, little Louie. Their son,
Yes,
their
I
brother.
forgot.
The little brother was Louie Schwartz. He was my buddy.
I
He was
forgot
my buddy
about
too.
Louie. But Myrna and Carol were the ones we hung out with.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good.
And between
When
them
you
and
worked
us,
in-
who was there? The Finks. Remember the Finks?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Every morning when Perry worked in Zaretsky, so Rex would come in and run up to the attic and wake up Perry and walk with her to Zaretsky's, and then he would come back every morning.
I did
But on
not.
Shabbos, he would climb up to the attic, would try and wake you up. You don't remember that, Perry?
And you said, it's Shabbos. It's Shabbos. The Shabbos going for the best.
He didn't know it was Shabbos.
No.
I forgot about that. Yeah, that's right.
But you do
You
remember.
remember Moshe and I, there was an old, like raggedy, ratty fur coat up in the attic. And I had this idea that if we put it over the two of us and come down like on all fours, it would look like a bear. And we did it. We came down from the attic with this thing all over us, and two people, humped underneath, and they started shrieking in the kitchen. The back stair came down near the kitchen.
Right.
It's like a spiral staircase a little bit. You remember that?
There was a front staircase and a back staircase.
Right. I'm talking about now the back staircase. When you came down,
Right.
that landed on the floor near the kitchen, at the end
Near
of
the
that was
kitchen.
So when we were coming down the stairs, it still looked like an animal. And they in this kitchen, they were shrieking. A bear, there's a bear in the house, And they weren't too happy with us when we revealed ourselves. They didn't laugh. They were supposed to laugh, but they didn't laugh.
I'm sure they laughed.
Remember that?
I'm sure they laughed. I remember a story about your father, Alta. I mean, your parents were not making lots of money in those days. And your father finally went out and bought himself a suit. Hadn't bought himself a suit in God knows how many years. Finally buys himself a suit. And on his way home, he stops off at the house on Lefferts Avenue.
Right.
And he said, you know the story?
Yeah, but tell it.
Okay.
I don't know it.
And he's sitting there with my parents telling them that he bought himself a suit. And then he says to you or Moshe or whoever it is, go out to the car and bring in the suit. And they go out to the car and the suit is gone. Somebody stole the suit. Now, here's a man who has not bought himself a suit in forever. He's not going to be able to replace that suit because he doesn't have the money to buy himself another suit. Another person would say, let him drop dead. Let him, he says, no, I looked at that man and I was very impressed. Is that the story you know?
Yeah.
That's
I don't know that story, but I see Yossi shaking his head. Yeah. I never heard
Yeah.
that.
I'll tell you
That
a
was
better
a-
story. If you want to talk about a story about thinking of others. After my father passed away, you probably know the story already. I got a phone call from Joel Sanders. Joel Sanders called me up maybe a half a year after my father was nifter. And he says, Yossi, he says, I have to tell you a story. He says, your father was a classy guy. That's how he put it. He says, I used to be a stockbroker. And he had been a stockbroker. Heshy, you remember Joel Sanders?
He was,
He
yeah.
was an insurance
By
man.
me in the shoe. He got with us in the shoe.
He was an insurance man, right?
I'm not sure what he did. But
Well, he was my insurance agent when I was in business years ago. But he had previously had been in stock, a stockbroker. And he, in fact, he shared an office with Marty Ginsburg, who was my accountant at the time. And anyway, so he says, your father was a classy guy. He says, I used to be in the stocks, I said, yeah. He said, your father was one of my clients. He said, I had a lot of very wonderful Muncie people that were clients of mine. And over the years, they made money. He says I was pretty good, and the returns were pretty good. It was occasional loss, but the gains, the profits were better than the losses, and people were happy, satisfied, let's say. And then I saw a stock, came across a stock that I said, this thing's going to go through the roof. It's very cheap right now, but this is bound to go through the roof. I was so sold on this stock that I convinced my customers,
I hear the
my
story.
clients, to put their money in, or whatever. I said, liquidate whatever you can. and put in whatever you can because you're going to get, this is going to make millionaires on this stock. And people did. They listened to me. I had a track record, and they listened to me, and I put it in. And as it went down, they bought more. And your father among them. And then the day came when the thing went bust.
Right.
And I was left with the job. This is when he left the stock market, when he left being a broker. He said, I had to call my clients and tell them, by the way, all your money's gone. I mean, if somebody didn't kept something else, a small amount, might have been left, but basically your portfolio's wiped out. He says to me, Yossi, I can't tell you how horrible it was. Every phone call that I made, the phone got heavier and heavier. People cursed me. People, why didn't you tell me? How could you not know? How could you make such a mistake? How stupid are you? You're a ganef. You stole the money. I mean, they were telling me, shelping me, cursing me. It was horrible. It's call after call. And he says, these are the Hadar Pnei Mansi, the Shena Balabata, the wealthy people. And he says, then I get to your father, and I tell him the same story. You're wiped out, Mr. Raice. Your portfolio is wiped out. And there's a pause, and your father says to me, Joel, you must be going through a very hard time now. I said, you don't know the half of it. So he says, Joel, maybe you need a few bucks, maybe I can lend you some money to tide you over. He says, I started crying, Joel says. I literally started crying.
I really did. I am having such a good time.
Wow.
He only thought of the other guy. That was my father.
Wow. I think
He
that
never let you suck the bones from the turkey on Thanksgiving.
Remember that story? Wasn't Thanksgiving, but anyway.
Well, whatever, there was a turkey. I think
it was a turkey. Yes, it was turkeys. Yeah. Yep, it was.
I'm offered to give him a loan.
He wanted to lend the money. Yeah. So do you need a loan to help you get through this time?
I'll give you another story with my sister Goldie. Did the same, very similar story. She had cancer. She had breast cancer. And then she was fine. She had it treated and everything. And then she was fine for 9.5 years, to the point that Suri called me at one point and said somebody wants, by that time Moshe had been long gone, and somebody wanted to set Goldie up, to set her up to get remarried. And Suri said to me, Perrie, what do you think? Can I set my mother up? Do I have to tell him about the cancer that she had 9.5 years ago? I said, Suri, you don't have to tell anything. If you live for 5 years after the cancer, it's nothing. It's gone. It's not going to. Okay, but I don't know what happened with that. But sure enough, 9.5 years later, it comes back, and she had her tests, and she went back to the doctor, and the doctor tells her that the cancer is back. You know what her response was? That must have been so hard for you to tell me that, doctor. Dr. Israel. Must have been so hard for you to have to tell me that.
Yep.
We come from good stock. Between your father and my sister, we're in good, oh goodness.
Perrie, what about us?
What about
all of us. We're all,
Yeah.
He's right. We have a lot to live up to.
That's good.
It is good.
wow. I think maybe we should wrap up. What?
I'll tell you a funny story.
You ready?
About me. I don't know how long we're on the phone, but it's a long time.
It doesn't matter. Tell your story.
I have a funny story. I have a pasuk that every time they ask me to speak at a bar mitzvah, at a Shabbat brachas, at whatever it is, when they ask me to speak, I always start off with the pasuk that says, Zeh hayom asah Hashem, nagila v'nismachavo, and somehow or other, I attach it to whatever simcha is happening, a bar mitzvah, a bris, whatever it is. And they know this is the family joke, that this is what Bobby likes. And one time I'm sitting around the table in Israel with the family, and I'm saying to them, I don't know how we got up to that subject, and I'm telling them that at my funeral, I want it to be a happy funeral. I don't want it to be a sad. I wanted everybody to talk about funny things that we did with Bubby, fun things that we went here, we did this with Bubby. So Abigail, my eldest grandson, says, I know when I'm going to get up to speak, I know exactly how I'm going to give the speech.
Well, you remember what your mother said when you were sitting shiva for your father?
I give up.
At the shiva for your father, your mother said, we're having such a good time. I'm only sorry I'll miss the next one.
He was there.
Yeah.
She was there, yeah, she was there. Not at the
Yeah,
Shiva, though.
Eddie was singing by
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah, for Goldie.
Oh, for Goldie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for Irving,
You didn't expect that to be the next one.
no.
No.
I remember her coming to Al's funeral and saying, no, to Irving's funeral. And I remember her saying, I only had 2 daughters and I'm burying 3 sons-in-law.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when she buried Elazar, not supposed to do that. Not supposed to happen. Okay, Yehuda, now that you've told us it's time to, now let's end on a funny story.
Well, I'll tell you just that, growing up, I didn't have any grandparents growing up, right? I'm named after the last one with my mother's father, and he died when I was in my mother's stomach. But the Tante Betty was like, she was growing up. She was like the greatest person in the world to me. She was the best, the absolute number one, sweetest. I always wanted to go to Tante Betty. Anytime that we had any excuse, we were going to anywhere. It was always like, my mother takes somebody to the airport. I'm like, okay, I'm coming to the airport. We're gonna go to Tante Betty also. Anytime we had to go anywhere, we were always running to Tante Betty, and it was the best. It was the best coming to her house, and she was the she was my favorite person in the world.
That's right.
She was.
I remember
my story about when my parents forgot me in Brooklyn. You know that story?
they forgot you in Brooklyn.
Yeah, they moved to Muncie. And they forgot me in Brooklyn. I was learning in Beis Talmud at the time, for the prior year, and it was doing quite well. It was the first time in yeshiva that I was really, really doing well. So they moved to Muncie. They said, "No, when are we going to do that?" Huh? I was steiging. Yeah, let's call it that. and they said, maybe we'd hate to disrupt him. Now he's finally doing well. If there's his
he sowed his wild oats.
So then, yeah. So they said, well, all right, let's see if we can arrange that he should stay in Beis Talmud, in Yeshiva Ketana of Beis Talmud. And they managed to work it out because Beis Talmud did not have it was not an out of town yeshiva. It was boys, local boys. The only dormitory they didn't have any dormitories. They had apartments, shared apartments by the older boys. The boys 19, 20, 21, 22. The boys in the Beis Medrash who would rent apartments together, and they managed to squeeze me into one of those apartments, and they moved to Muncie and they left me living in Brooklyn. So I like to say they forgot me in Brooklyn. Anyway, so what happened? I was very lonely, and I used to come in after supper into this apartment. The older boys didn't show up till 10, 11, 12. They were learning Ma'ariv. I was finished with my day after English studies, the afternoon, and after that I had supper, and I would go to the apartment, and I was lonely and I was scared. I was in the city and I didn't have anybody around. Every sound I would hear would spook me. Anyway, after a week or two of this, I had enough, and I went to, where do you go? Where's the safe place to go to? Tante Betty. So I get in the subway and I go to Tante Betty, and I arrived there, in the early evening, and she feeds me another supper, or maybe it was the first supper, I don't know, but anyway, but it was great. And I'm hanging around, and I found plenty of reading material, and it got late, and so I went to sleep. I stayed over. The next morning, she doesn't wake anybody. Her theory, her sheet is, you don't wake anybody, ever. You never disturb somebody's sleep. So I slept till 10 or 11. And finally, I wake up. I come upstairs. I was in the basement there. Come upstairs, and I need to. I don't know if I had film with me, if I had a borrowed film or whatever. Anyway, and the day proceeds, and I stick around, and that night I'm there again overnight. By this
you
time,
didn't go to yeshiva.
No, the next morning the yeshiva became aware, or maybe that day they became aware that they have a missing boy. So they call my parents to say, we have a terrible news, your son disappeared. So my parents, they thought about that. They probably, in 5 minutes, realized who to call. Called your mother. And she said, oh yeah, he's here. He came, he didn't look so well. He maybe wasn't feeling so well. So I have him here, Not feeling so well because I was happy to be there, Anyway, so they said, oh, you got to get back to yeshiva. They, they're very upset. So I went back and I probably told them I wasn't feeling well. So I went to my aunt. 2 or 3 weeks later, I do the same thing again. And
It's
again,
contagious.
yeah, it's contagious. I didn't really get over it entirely the first time. Anyway, so I don't know if it was after twice or after 3 times my parents realized this was not working out well. And they had to bring me back to bring me to Muncie and registered me and enrolled me in Beishrage in the 10th grade. I was 10th grade then. So,
And the rest is history.
Yeah, and the rest is history. So anyway, so that's my story. My parents moved to Muncie and forgot me in Brooklyn.
It's a good story.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
I feel sorry for you.
So what you were saying that, when you need a refuge, you go to Tante Betty.
It's so sad that you grew up without grandparents. And I had all 4 of my grandparents walk down the aisle at my wedding.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was a bracha. As a matter of fact, I'm sitting at my computer now and there's a picture of all 4 grandparents at my wedding. I have a picture hanging right on the wall here.
Wow.
Incredible.
Can't see. That was lucky.
The only grandparent
Your
I had
generation
at the
was a
time
bracha.
of
You
my
had grandparents at all.
I'm sorry?
That generation grew up without family. By your wedding,
Why?
how many people were there? It was after the war. How many people were by your wedding? 100?
At my wedding?
At your wedding, yeah.
I don't know. Everybody I knew.
All 100.
I got married in 1955.
Right.
I got married the 3rd Hanukkah candle in 1955, December 1955. So that was 10 years after the war.
You got married in the Gold Manor? That was Gold.
I personally did not know anybody who was killed in the war.
They were killed in the war. How would you know that?
Oh, that's true too.
No, the family.
It was not part of our family.
Small families.
A lot
I
of
didn't have family.
races. There were a lot of races that died in the war.
A lot of races were slaughtered in the war.
Actually, do we know any family that died in the war?
We didn't know any of them because they didn't come to you. You didn't go to Europe at that age, and you didn't.
No, you didn't. But I'm just trying to think. Nobody that I.
Make it here.
Nobody who you were aware of existing. You mean? Well, I got a whole list over here.
I have all my family was here in America. My parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. I had all my
Not your
aunts and
parents'
uncles.
aunts and uncles, not your parents' or grandparents'
No.
aunts and uncles.
No, but my aunts and uncles were all here. We had one cousin Yossi Dresner. Remember cousin Yossel?
No.
Yossi Dresner.
So what
He
happened?
came
But he was here after the war.
He came here after the war. Yeah, he survived after the war. But I never knew of him before. I mean, I never knew that part of the family.
Do you remember
Dresner?
Yossel Appel? Speaking of Yossels, anybody remember Yossel Appel?
No.
You're kidding me. I can't believe it. Heshy? No? He was so close with our grandparents. He used to come to Saratoga every year, but he came a number of times. He always had a shiny new car, and he would wash his car in the backyard there. And Yossel Appel, and he had a kind of children's furniture and toys store in Brooklyn.
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, Yossel Appel.
Was he a landslide of?
Yeah, a landsman of Zaidi and Bobby, and it was a big part of. I mean, I think I had the opportunity once with mommy, who took me, and we went to his store when she was shopping, and it was like a children's, dreamland, all these good things. I didn't get anything from it, but at least I saw them. Big toys, But he would always came to Saratoga. He was that close. They would come and stay over,
Well,
In Saratoga.
there were a lot of guests. Rabbi Krieger and Rabbi Yogo.
Yes.
Krieger, are you kidding? Rabbi Krieger was he loved us. Years later, I bumped into him at Chasanas sometimes. He was a big guy, He was the Mattisdorfer Rav's father-in-law. He was Rav Schlesinger's Zayda from one side.
I remember sitting at the Shabbos table in Saratoga, and we had a long table, Shabbos table, and some old man died at the Shabbos table. Does anybody remember that?
That's very rude.
Yeah.
No, I don't remember it. No. I would remember something
that
like
story.
that.
But Rabbi Krieger used to come, and he loved Feigele, and I bumped into him in the Chasana several times actually. Years later, after Saratoga was history, and he saw me and I introduced myself. And he said, "Oh, was macht Feigele?" That was what was on his head, you know. Was macht Feigeles? I told him, you know.
Feigele meaning your sister?
Hey, your sister.
That's the name.
Your sister.
Yeah.
How was your sister Fakey affected by the protests in LA?
They were terrified. They were terrified. They happened blocks from her house.
They what?
They occurred. They were
Within
mere
blocks
from her house.
I'm sure.
It was very terrifying. Very terrifying. Yeah.
Very scary.
Very.
Miss Sugar.
Raizel took a car ride and she took video of downtown Rodeo Drive where your uncle had
During that or after it was burned?
No, afterwards.
Yeah.
She saw everything boarded up, graffiti all over the place. They knew it.
Not
The high-end
Rodeo
stores.
Drive. Rodeo Drive, they didn't let them riot there. Rodeo Drive was protected.
Are you sure?
Yeah,
I don't know what street she
blocks
was
nearby.
riding on, but there were a lot of streets.
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
fancy stuff. I don't know the name.
Hello?
Some guy took a video, drove around Manhattan.
I'm sorry,
Take the
Yeah.
video.
I saw it.
I'm
that
sorry,
video.
Mordechai. I was
Boarded up place after place and destroyed. It was unbelievable. Manhattan shut down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have
Okay,
to
I
say,
think we talked now. Let's get off that subject. The family is much more interesting.
yeah, this was really amazing. And Be'ez Hashem, we got to do this again. But I think we got to wrap up for tonight. I think we did a little over 2 hours, so this was amazing.
Oh,
You gotta go
really?
to sleep.
Oh, my goodness.
I know I would like to give this to my family, to my kids. How do they get hold of
You
this?
send us the recording?
Of course.
You put it on
Of
YouTube?
course.